Hello, welcome back to the bottom. My name is Beast, and today with hello lady. Hello lad, sorry. Today we'll be starting with the Fantastic routes. Like I said last time, it is entirely on my whim that I choose now, and my choice, entirely on a whim. I will flip a weight box. Maybe we should actually decide which side would result in which first. And you know what? Now that I flipped it, I'm gonna have a bias, and I'm not gonna do that. So instead, I'm gonna roll a dice. One to 10. Actually no. Odd. Hishia's story. Even. Mitori's story. Actually, odd. Yeah, odd Hishia's story. Even Mitori's story. You got an even. Mitori's story it is. Also, God, I really like the decision making of just flipping a coin when it comes to stuff like this. We can also just watch the opening now. I'm not gonna stop talking though. Basically, when it comes to decision making, I really like the act of just flipping a coin. Mainly because when you flip a coin, either I land on a result and pick it, or the moment I see the result, I notice I actually feel like going for the other more, and then choose that one instead. In a way, it just helps me like that. Like, I flip a coin. Let's say it's like about, okay, am I gonna like get a pizza or get like fucking Asian takeout? I'm like, okay, what the fuck do I do? Well, I'm gonna just flip a coin. Like, it lands on Asian takeout, and either I just sit there like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, let's feel like that, or I sit there like, it says Asian takeout, but actually I kind of feel more like pizza. It just helps me like that. It's odd, I know. I'm gonna shut up now and just listen to this, because I really like this opening. Misaki. We're gonna start talking again now. I always like it when they have like actually animated bits in the openings, because it's just like, yes, we're just going to slide sprites and CGs across the fucking screen and gonna say that that's animation always just felt odd to me. That's why I really like Ubisoft in that way when it comes to the openings. They actually like go out of their way to like properly animate stuff. Ephemeral Dream. But yeah, I just really like the animations they do in the Ubisoft openings. And now I have the Sabbath of the Witch opening stuck in my head. And the Draco-Rats opening. And Descendant on Banca. Ascendant in Banca opening. And the Riddle Joker one. They just all are kind of like simultaneously playing in my mind right now, and it is torture. Is it though? I was dashing through a forest, following the faint footsteps. The rainy, verdant region of Japan was simply full of such green areas. The cities were basically surrounded by forests and the like. This land was completely unlike the wastelands I'd been to during some of my younger years. There was a near full, beautiful moon above me. No matter where I was on this green earth, it always reminded me of the chest outline of a well-endowed maiden. And how splendid that was. The smell of trees and dirt reminded me of my homeland. But I didn't have time to dwell on the nostalgia. I had to hurry. Faint whispers of my instinct couldn't be wrong. The forest was dark, enlightened only by the moon and the stars. Bright as they seemed above, their shine was fleeting down on earth, and was far from enough to light the path for those who, unlike me, couldn't see in the dark. The ground I ran on was steep, and my step was firm, and I was able to keep my presence unknown. In all honesty, Narita was so flustered that even I found it odd. Normally I would have remained calm, but this night was special. That much was certain. But that was a poor excuse. I penetrated the forest and shook away my hesitation, for I'd finally come across the scene I'd been chasing. At the bottom of the steep slope of the forest, there was a German car and a maid. It was the source of the ominous feeling I felt by chance when I secretly returned to the academy. What I was following was neither smell nor sound. It was something puny, seemingly mixed with the sound of early summer insects and rustling trees. It was a change even I wouldn't normally notice. I just happened to do it by chance. Some would call this the sixth sense. This place was far from the main road, a place one couldn't arrive at on purpose. There were no residences nearby, and it was quite perfect for shady acts. Need a few more seconds. That was far too much. Before I knew what I was doing, I kicked the slope below and drew a parabola in the air. A moment of freedom from the shacks of gravity and a crushing wind making noise in my ears. I was over 10 meters from the ground below, meaning that I would hit it at over 50 kilometers per hour. Even I would die from such a fall. Indeed, I was an HMI, had supernatural rational powers. My physical functions barely differed from those of base mankind. I didn't hesitate. Even if there was no other path, I would walk it, even if it took me through hell. It was a promise, a piece of will that kept me myself, and fixed like the stars above since 7 years ago. Shinji Narita was unable to ignore absurdities happening before him. The car was parked in perfect darkness, and a certain someone approached its back door with precise movements. Just as I'd expected from what I saw from distance, but I was a maid from the academy, like the one that had accompanied Taigi Mikado. Still in the air, I drew and fired my Glock 17, 2 shots taking into account both the darkness and the speed of my fall. The opened holes in the right arm and torso of the black-clad maid. Didn't have time to hesitate have no time to waste on hesitation. After all, the maid was targeting a defenseless individual. If I'd continued to run down the slope and stopped her from up close, she would have noticed me, and it'd have been too late. I was only successful because no one would expect a surprise attack from above in these conditions. I didn't know the reason, but I couldn't allow this violence, especially since one subjected to it would be a maiden with the possibility of being well endowed. Precise shots made the maid fall backwards. The gun that she'd taken out fell to the ground. I hit the ground as well, but as I did, I lowered myself and rolled to disperse the damage of the impact. Using the remnant of the momentum, I stood up and pushed between the bloodstained maid at the car, and used my left hand to sweep away the unconscious maiden inside. For a moment, a dark, muddy black omen pierced my chest, and I couldn't imagine why I felt it. It disappeared as quickly as it came, and I returned to my senses. It didn't even slow me down. By the time I ran away, the black-clad executioner expired and collapsed. Just in case the maid had reinforcements, I moved behind the car to use it as a shield for both me and the maiden. That was why she finally became conscious again.
成田真理なぜここへ
Mitori Kaputayama, one of the Tenkawa Noble Academy's crowns, seemed to still be a bit out of it, as though she had been administered some sort of drug.
簡単なことだとも、兜山ミトリ。この成田真理は、乙女の窮地には万難排して駆けつけるのが信条。この場にいて何の不思議があるだろう。まして、君のように豊満なる未来を宿す可能性を、あたら摘み取ろうという無粋。そのような人類史への冒涜を、私は決して許さない。
成田さん、許さないのは結構なんですけれども。
何かね。
Could you let go of my something like that. Still in my hands, she looked at me with the eyes of an uneasy squirrel. I tried to make the best smile I could and keep my voice as calm as possible.
その
Yep.
手が胸掴んでいて
Tears in her eyes were both seductive and enchanting. I took the liberty of enjoying the beauty and plumpness as well as my left hand could. It was quite fine indeed. The size was on the smaller side, but the shape and sensation was excellent. Most importantly, it shone with hope for the future. I had an eye for this, and a single fondle was enough for me to know that this chest right here had good prospects.
うむではなく
She was now red to her ears. Such a pure reaction certainly aroused the man in me. But such impure desires were nothing in front of my faith for the well-endowed.
窮地に駆けつけた救いの手がわしわしと乙女の胸をもみしだく至極当然の成り行きとは思わないかね。
そんな気の違った成り行きがどこの世界にありますか
First she was tense, then her bashful face became angry, and finally she snapped.
もしかすると怒っているだろうか。
もしかしなくても怒っているように見えませんの？ああ、そうですの。さては成田さんの顔に2つもついている目はただの節穴でしたのね。
つまり片方だけではなくもう片方の胸も揉みしだいていただけないだろうか。
そんな頓強な言い訳はどこの世界にもありませんわよ。
She snapped even harder than before.
まさか私が読み違えたと。誠に乙女ハートとはオータムウェザーのように計りがたい。
あなたの脳に異常があるだけですのよ。私、成田さんのことは少なからず買っておりましたが、そのハレンチな生き様だけはつくづく許容いたしかねます。今夜という今夜は
気のせいだったか。
The version of the sixth sense torturing me couldn't be the assassin maid I defeated. Mitori was energetic and proud and sensitive. Was as energetic, proud, and sensitive as always. She'd almost lost her life just a few minutes ago, but she was thoroughly hiding any perplexion that might have caused. Mitori was far more refined and strong than I ever knew. It felt something unnatural right before I swept her away. Was that just an illusion caused by the excitement from the night? Is my mind that sensitive and weak? This made sense, but for now I just cut short Mitori's words. Seemed to have forgotten the situation.
それよりもミトリ、どうしてこんな時間にこんな場所に？君のような育ちの良い乙女が無断外出かね？
The academy was a place that observed HMIs, and students that left without permission were severely punished. Couldn't even go out in daytime, and it was even worse if you did at night. Logically thinking, it was impossible for her to be here, and I couldn't even imagine why she would be executed by Taigi's maid. Normally, I'd been surprised that the maid's chores involved disposal. But just a few hours ago, I'd encountered a mysterious monster that could jump on top of a car, moving at 100 kilometers per hour. It wasn't strange for the Academy, when a stronghold to house such monsters.
それは私にはきちんと理由が。ともかく窮地を救っていただいたことには感謝いたしますが、成田さんはなぜここへ？
She asked the same thing as before, but the implication was completely different.
いいかね。私は特別なので規則の例外に属しているのだよ。当然許可は取っていないが、些細な問題だ。
まったくこれっぽっちも些細ではありません。
うん。君もサクと同様でうるさ型なのだね。
当然ですわ。私たちはスクールを守って。
As the maiden spoke her lovely words, the silhouette appeared behind her like a forest wraith. The maid had come back to life. How I'd finished her off. But it was only 9mm. That was a bullet in her stomach. It was a heavy injury, even in the best case. She shouldn't have been able to even move.
成田さん、何を？
Still holding Mitori, I threw my body forward. The murderous bullet melted into the darkness and grazed my head by only a few millimeters. The maid stood up like a marionette with its strings cut. The deadly puppet moved strangely as though denying all human physiology. There were guns in her crossed hands. She was firing them both. Bullets flew above me as I dashed with a low body position. Her aim wasn't true, likely because of the injury.
ならば貴様は不死の亡霊ではなく生身の怪物だ。
Mitori belatedly caught up to the situation, crouched and held her breath. I didn't blame her. Though she was a strong maiden, deadly battles were scary for all mankind. On the battlefield, each moment wasted hesitating could mean your death. Shifted my focus away from anything besides what was happening in front of me. Why was she alive? Had she come back to life? All such thoughts were excessive.
殺して死なぬのなら死ぬまで殺す。
Okay, right, with Mitori in my left hand and the Glock in my right, I fixed my aim. I'd run towards the maid to avoid gunfire, but despite her poor state, she countered that instantly. The black-clad murderer mustering her remaining power to become like lightning and jump above. Mustered her remaining power to become like lightning and jump above. The guns were still in her hands. She moved up faster than I expected. It was quite an inhuman feat. Too slow. I was too slow. The lag caused by me holding Mitori was fatal in a battle like this. 3 guns fired at the same time. The exchange lasted for but a moment. Once the echoes of gunfire vanished between the mountains, the maid, shot in her forehead, fell to the ground as if drained of all life. The monster stopped moving for certain now. She was as resilient as the wolfman said to appear deep in European forests, but it appeared that losing the command tower was too much even for her.
終わったのですね。
2度目の復活はない。安心したまえ。
Mitori wanted to ask something more, but hesitated. During the last attack, the maid's movements were scattered for just a moment. If it wasn't for that, I would have been the one to die. Who here was responsible for that? It wasn't me or the maid herself. And there was just one other person here. I looked down at the dead remains. Mitori also looked at the maid bathing in the night wind. The loneliness and sadness in her eyes made her look as though she'd lost something important. Mitori Kaputayama was born and raised in this peaceful country. In her eyes, the value of life was far greater than that of gold. The fact that it was an enemy who tried to take her life meant little. Regardless of what, she'd done nothing to regardless of that, she'd done nothing to prevent this outcome. Found that nature of her is beautiful. The strength sporting it was quite unlike that of the noble queen carrying all the renown and pride of the crowns. Sharp and arrows on sometimes, as gentle as feathers on others. Her gracefulness was the kind that couldn't break before any cruelty or tragedy. I would ask nothing now. Mitori Kabutayama was strong. She would surely be able to recover and be as she was supposed to be. Although she would need just a bit more time. However, there was something I had to know right away.
狙われる心当たりはあるかね。それに、こんな時間に外出した理由を差し支えなければ聞かせてもらえないか。
時の先生の指示でした。今夜の夜会に来られる予定になっているとある方をお迎えに行ってほしいと。あのメイドが運転手を務めて。
For a moment I thought that she was so shaken that she lost her words, but that wasn't the case. She looked with curious eyes at a defeated opponent but me. To be more precise, the gun in my right hand. Mitori seemed to be a far stronger maiden than I thought. Despite the desperate situation and the shock, she was able to maintain her composure.
しまったと言うべきかな。
I had no choice considering the situation, but she now knew two things I'd rather she hadn't.
あなたは何者ですの、成田さん。以前、コレオグラフで私たちを手玉に取ったことといい、そんなものを所持しておられることといい。
Her dulled eyes quickly became sharp. The drugs she'd been administered to make her powerless had surely drained from her system.
それに、どうしてこんな場所におられるのか。クラウンの一人である私に、納得のいく説明をしてもらわなければなりません。
Like, not to be rude or anything, but you're not a crown anymore. Like, even if you're still convinced that you're a crown, the Academy just tried to murder you, so I doubt they would let you back in. She looked into my eyes. It was gaze that, although not needlessly aggressive, was devoid of any vagueness. I felt there was a tip of a blade right in front of my heart.
ごまかしは通用しそうにないな。
However, the reason why I was here was really the last thing I could say. After all, Shinigami had just proven that he was an enemy of the Academy. There was something I'd sworn to do 7 years ago. The real goal behind my arrival to the Tenko Noble Academy was revenge, to bring the hammer of justice upon Kurofune and his fellow traitors. Tonight was the conclusion of the first act of this revenge tragedy. Couldn't have been here if I hadn't left the Academy to give Hanazono an ending he deserved. I've been able to save Mitori from the wicked hand of fate. That placed me in a situation I couldn't talk my way out of. It was quite a tasteful play by the ill-natured Lord in heaven above, tucking his heart. I hesitated on how to respond, which was quite rare for me. What Mitori was questioning weren't all the facts behind Shinri Narita protecting her and defeating the maid, but the nature of Shinri Narita who'd killed an enemy without any hesitation to speak of. It meant that my words could make me an enemy or ally in her eyes. She would become a great obstacle, getting in the way of what I had to do.
まさかだな。ほうけるな、成田真理。
She said she was protecting the Academy. How could such a person ally with a man, driven mad by a lust for revenge? Our gazes met, some clash of heavy silence. The dark yet steadfast will in my gaze made her shake, if only slightly.
成田真理。返答を。
However, she quickly recovered. Why? It was obvious. She wanted to protect what she had, like a mother cradling her hurt child. I honestly found her dazzling. Mitori Kabutayama was supported by the strength of her love.
大したことではないだろう。
Mitori sadly gasped, had gone and said how it was. The life of an enemy was not like dust scattered by the wind. Couldn't think of anything else to say. Couldn't work around this. I merely told the truth. Even if she wouldn't regret giving her life away for the sake of her love. Even she wouldn't regret giving her life away for the sake of her love. A strong, noble soul like hers deserved respect. Besides, becoming akin to a vacuum, I waited for her response. No matter what she said, Shinri Narita would do what he had to, and go where he had to. That was all the future had in store. An explosive sound and wind interrupted the great divide between us.
これは
There was an insect-like silhouette flying high through the broad, empty sky above. It emitted no light, not even that from a tail lamp. The explosive sound of the rotor couldn't be heard if it wasn't right above us. It was a UH-1 Iroquois. There were armaments installed on the camouflaged frame. Making it clear it was an anti-group gunship.
スクールか。念入りなことだ。
成田さん、何を。これはまさかスクールが私たちを狙って。
私がここまで接近を許すとは。最新鋭のステルスか。外見はレトロな旧式機でも中身はすっかり別物だな。推理にはそれで十分ではないかね。この近辺でそんな装備を運用できるのは国家でなければスクールだけだろう。加えて言うなら君の命を狙ったメイドはスクールの職員だ。理由はともかくよほど恨まれているらしい。
それはでもそんな。
She bit her lip, looking more bitter than perplexed. She would have already been aware where the will to kill her tonight had come from. In fact, the one to order Mitori Kabutayama to go with the maid was Tokunoyomi herself. Mitori was meant to be disposed of, but no other student could see her. But why? Mitori was a crown and a precious dwelt here HMI. Oh, Tokunoyomi. More was likely that Kurofune was involved in this as well. That meant that the academy was trying to get rid of her. But why? The sound of the helicopter were coming closer. The 25mm chain gun installed began spinning and aimed at its prey. Us. It was clear that we were to be exterminated. The metal raptor above dove down on us.
舌を噛むな。
今何があったの。浮いた感じ。空が流れる。私もしかすると。
It took her a good few seconds to realize that she's being embraced by Narita, who was running with her in hands. The landscape went by and vanished behind like ink. It was actually as fast as the wind.
怖さは感じなかった。いいえ、怖くなかったのではなくて、そんな余裕がなかっただけ。今夜は何もかもがわからない。理解できない。どう
Whoops.
いくらでも湧いてくる疑問を踏みにじるように、頭上から雷鳴じみた轟音が迫ってくる。戦闘ヘリだ。人類の知恵の結晶たる兵器。反射的にすくんでしまう。どうしたらいいのかわからなくて、気がつくと成田、彼のたくましい胸に顔を伏せていた。熱い胸板、力強い腕、自分とまるで違う匂いに驚く。汗の匂い。それともこれが男性ということなのか。
The fuck is happening? Like Mitori, this is not the time to be getting all frisky, okay?
頬が熱くなる。息が詰まりそう。クラウンの仲間とふざけてはしゃいで抱き合ったりする時とは本当に何もかも違っている。暗くてよかった。こんな顔とても彼には見せられない。きっと熟れたリンゴみたいに赤くなってしまっているから。
Like Mitori really like fucking dialing up the horny right now. Like Jesus Christ, calm down, lass.
スクールで学んでいる時に異性を意識した経験はあまりない。もちろんそれは私が出会って学園で、そう仲睦まじそうに過ごしている学生たちの姿はよく見かける。クラウンのメンバーは女性ばかりだ。高グレードの HMI の適性に性差が関係あるのではと先生方が議論しているぐらいには偏っている。実際特に後天性 HMI の場合、適性は女の方が高いらしい。成田真理、彼は男性。初めての男性のエトワール級 HMI。一人分の体重を余分に支えているのに、 彼の失踪は機械よりもずっと精密で力強い。
However, that wasn't enough to escape. The booming sound quickly caught up to us. Narita desperately tried to escape it, but alas, we surface dwellers were no match for raptors diving down on us. The helicopter's chain gun roared. Sounds akin to the humming of hornets mercilessly touched the surface. Dodging the bullets that could rid him of his limbs each, Narita carried Mitori through the rising dust. He hid in the sloppy forest, but the mechanical raptor had a thermal scanner and other things that made escape impossible. The barrage of bullets, far more powerful than the handguns, chewed through the forest like a lawnmower.
どうして私たちは生きているの?
My heart was still beating, but she barely felt. Her heart was still beating, but she barely felt it. It didn't seem real, like a shoddy action film. No man should be able to escape this murderous weapon born of the wisdom of mankind. Indeed, not even Narita was able to evade this burning hail of bullets. Thus, instead of evading the bullets, he focused on the trajectories. Like a needle, with needle-like accuracy, he slipped through the blind spots both from the limits of the handgun, chain gun, and the heli's location. Bullets could only fly straight, so there's no way they could hit you if you weren't standing in the line of the muzzle. However, this acrobatic magic could only continue for only about 10 seconds more. Fatigue would make him miss a step or lose speed. That would be Shinri Narita's demise. Naturally, Mitori would go with him. The disturbed wood and ground came a hail that touched Mitori's cheek as she clung to him.
成田さん、
諦めるにはまだ早い。生きている限り可能性はあり続ける。約束しよう。私の命ある限り君は守られると。
The 10 seconds passed by in a moment. Even after 15, he didn't slow down one bit. All 20 passed. He showed no despair or signs of giving up. Still carrying Mitri, evaded the deadly rain, bouncing on a possibility as thin as the edge of a blade.
嵐のような爆音、巻き上がった土煙で視界さえおぼつかない。1秒先に気づかないうちに飛散していてもおかしくない。なのに腕の中の私に微笑む彼。今まさに死地に立たされているというのに、不思議なくらい落ち着き払った優しい瞳。
By the way, can I just talk about some? Why the fuck do the main characters in SMT Devil Survivor not know about Balder and his weakness, but do know about Pazuzu? I feel like you're far more likely to learn about Balder than fucking Pazuzu. Like, one is fucking Norse, which is like one of the most explored old polytheistic religions we know. The other is Mesopotamia. Anyway.
その奥に時折きらめく固く鋭い刃に似た鮮烈な意志の光。
振り落とされないようしっかりと捕まっていたまえ。
はい、スクールの秩序、クラウンの名も滋賀にかけない。どうしようもなく苦手で腹立たしい人。でもどうしてだろう、私の胸がこんなに高鳴っている。
君の胸はまだ豊満とは呼べないが素晴らしい可能性を秘めている。奇跡の卵を狙う輩にはしかるべき報いを受けさせねばならない。
How's that?
成田さん、やっぱり最悪ですわね。なんて無作法だろう。こちらの気も知らないで。でもおかげで頭が冷えて自分が何者かを思い出せた。自分を保っているつもりでも動揺していたらしい。まだ遅くない。やるべきことをやろう。今この場でできること、自分がなさねばならないこと、私が仕留めます。
Ride in hand, I ran without stopping, but that wasn't enough to lose the persistent helicopter. It was subjected to intermittent attacks from its chain gun. Dodged, constantly maintaining maximum concentration as well as speed. It already surpassed the limits of my stamina. So long could I continue this? If I tired out, Mitori's fate would be sealed as well. Did I allow that to happen?
美を介さぬ輩におめおめ打たれてやる趣味はないが、さてどうしたものか。
When in desperate situations, it was best for people to keep smiling. Creating the best smile I could, I thought of what to do. On me, I only had 2 Glock 17s. They were far from enough for me to bring down the heli. What about my possibility? That curse-inflicted halo. The Academy had named Shinri Narita's power a Hamlet 12. He used voice as the medium to imprint a code into people's brains and suppress their minds. It was imprinted, the code didn't go away until I willed it. It continued to affect their thoughts like a curse. Though potent, it could do nothing here. I had no means of making my voice reach the pilot of the flying demon raptor. Was I to just continue running? That was difficult as well. According to a certain statistic, the KD ratio of helicopters against tanks was 1 to 10, meaning that 10 tanks were destroyed before a helicopter fell. To the metal bird, anything that crawled on the ground were like powerless rabbits. Perhaps I could have escaped this alone, but I wanted to do it with Mitori.
私が仕留めます。
Gripped my hands and silently muttered. The resolution in her profoundly colored eyes was very clear. I was confident that she could reach it and bring it down with her halo. I'd experienced Mitori Kabutoyama's halo back during the choreography lesson. She had fatal spears that could pass by any obstacles and pierce targets far away.
あれはスクールだ。
She had a chance indeed. I'd considered myself, but instantly threw it away. No matter what the reasons were, the ones after her life were none other than the very treasures she wished to protect. Thus I had to ask if she was indeed capable of wielding a blade against them. She looked down for a moment as though in pain, then pursed her lips and looked up right at me.
カブト山みとりはこんな場所では死ねません。
承知した。
短く力強い依頼。承知した。彼が告げたのはそれだけだ。他には何もいたわりも優しさも何もない。だから何よりも感謝する。私を守るべきか弱い花ではなく強い女として扱ってくれたことを。
Still in Narita's arms, Mitori closed her eyes. She was still under the influence of the drug, but she was able to put her will and body together to make a spear manifest. She aimed it at the pilot. Mitori's spears, sometimes called spindles, passed through anything to pierce the target. The heli's heavy armor meant nothing before them.
ブートコードを省略。
She acted as fast as she could to bring down the target as quickly as possible. She made up for the lack of precision with the focus so powerful it seemed to burn her brain. Like always, Mitori pictured herself reaching for the target. Suddenly there was a strange feeling in her mouth, as though she bit into
なん
sand.
だろう。今何かおかしな。
Feeling lasted for only a split second. It began feeling as it always had. Mitori relaxed and sharpened her will once more. Deadly spears were fixed on the target, and
まさかそんな。
she opened her eyes wide, pale as death.
何かトラブルかね。
あのヘリに人が乗っていない。
遠隔操作ということか。
Mitori bit her lip in
これ
chagrin.
ではなすすべがありません。
ミトリ、君のハローは
全てが予定通りなのだと自分の力が役に立たないということよりもこの状況の意味するところが心臓をわしづかみにする。それは時の先生が私を処理するのにどうしようもなく本気であるということ。心臓が跳ねる。動機が増す。
Whoops.
視界が歪んだ。 息が乱れる。体を制御できない、これまで一度もなかった異常な何かが起こっている。彼が見ている。感じるように、きっと私は頬が赤い。つい数時間前の夜会の光景が思い浮かぶ。散った花、この手でちぎって散らせてしまった花だって、とても楽しそうに咲いていたから。
ミトリ、
私を救ってくれた人。ああ、どうしてこんな風に思ってしまうんだろう。ナリト、大事なことを声に出して伝えないと。さあ、私、あなたの愛したい。
ミトリ。
Ah! Help. Also, can we like get a repeat of that weird transition? Okay, it wasn't this time. That was like a weird... I don't know what sign it was. I think it was the like scene added. Like scenario select scene added thing. Wonder if we can actually access the... Oh, change. What? What? Huh? What does the change? What does the change do? Hang on, yeah. But yeah, it was like the scene added tag that shows up here. But it was also like flying around along with everything else and it just looked odd. An indescribable presence gathered right within my arms. The air became bleary and the atmosphere began to rot. The nausea was such that I felt as though my insides were turned inside out. It brought me to a halt. I knew for a while that it meant death in my situation. My body was screaming for me to stop. I was overcome by a repulsive feeling, as though the world itself had been repainted. The air became as dense as mud, and felt like the worst poison. It seemed to soak into me through my bare skin, threatening even my sanity.
Nanda.
The instincts that had saved me many times over the past 7 years were raising the alarm on the highest possible level. I hadn't felt like this as I'd faced a pursuing party from the mysterious Silver-Armed Brotherhood Society while dealing with hunger and fever in a valley in Central Asia. The appearance and voice hadn't changed at all, and yet she was lacking something that made us human. Is this an effect of Mitori's halo? It certainly didn't create such anomalies. Importantly, that I couldn't accept this thing as Mitri. Yet the appearance was something completely unlike her. A playful chuckle. The atmosphere began to shake. The helicopter above exploded and fell while releasing black smoke. Did Mitri just bring down the gunship? Yet just insisted that it wasn't possible for her. A certain chilling premonition slipped in my heart. Shinri Narita would die. If I stayed here, I would expire in just a few seconds. Thus my instincts told me to quickly abandon her and run. The thing that looked like Mitri reached out to me only to freeze in a highly unnatural way, like a marionette with strings pulled by an amateur. She covered her face with her hands. Below them, she was breathing as heavily as a beast. She was out of it, clearly unable to maintain a proper rhythm. The thing was suddenly attacked by its harmony. Why had she reacted to me calling her? Wasn't sure, but as thin as it was clearly the only hope I could cling to. Mitri was still in there. She still hadn't forgotten what she was. Her soul was fighting whatever thing was coming after her.
ならばダンスのパートナーは私が務めよう。
The right hand covering her face moved away as if pulled off by force. Between her fingers I saw eyes as dark as the deepest hells. Whatever it was she was shouldering, the balance was as solid as that of a skyscraper built on sand. It would surely collapse beyond recovery in less than a minute.
恐れに抗うことを勇気という。それは人の持つ最も尊いものの一つだ。
As it passed the fear born out of my instincts, death was nothing to fear. The only thing to fear here was giving up, to run away from what had to be done.
生きるとは己の魂に恥じぬことだ。時に敗れ汚れることがあったとしても己に胸を張ることだと私は信じている。
Couldn't let this moment pass. I had to reach her heart in one try.
兜山みとり、君の語った夢を取り戻そう。さて。
I initiated the boost code. To an HMI, a halo was basically like a limb. It was possible to activate it without any codes. Just like the best athletes had their own unique means of achieving the right mindset, so did certain words or phrases have the potential to increase concentration to unprecedented heights. It was something I'd learned from Miss Tokino during my limited time at the academy. Didn't expect it to be useful here. Using this power, I would seize the possibility that would save Mitori.
ミトリ、君の胸の曲線は月にも勝る。
The change of swift, corruption like malice swirling within her vanished, and the forest regained its natural silence in seconds. The fuck was that about? Like, how the fuck does that save her? Seems still nothing had happened here at all. With my hands, Mitori lost consciousness, as though she'd just recovered from a heart disease. She was leaning against my chest, completely limp.
成田。
ミトリ、意識はどうかね。
I was suddenly slapped in the face. It was a weak slap I could have easily avoided, but it somehow landed.
たく、なんてハレンチな。乙女に言うことではありませんわよ。
それだけ言えるなら大丈夫そうだな。
Her heated breaths made it seem like she was just having a nightmare, albeit as sweet as nectar. Mitori's expression was once again her own.
成田さん、今、私。
Worry appeared in her exhausted eyes. However, we weren't blessed with the time for me to reply, or for us to enjoy the reunion. The gunship was still active. The metal wrap. It was releasing black smoke and generally looked in a sorry state. But it was hovering above us as if sneering at the failure of its prey. 25mm chain guns let out a deadly roar. A soft electronic feminine voice resounded through the academy chairman's office, declaring that the situation has been neutralized. The room suited the owner quite well, unaffected, sincere, full of fortitude and vigor. It was late at night, yet the 3 people central to the academy's project were gathered here, wide awake. The steel-like tall man, the chairman of the academy, Kurune Mikado. Sagacity and intelligence clad in a lab coat, the mistress Tokino Yomise. Itagi Mikado, the only one of them who had a disinterested and utterly dispassionate expression on his face. Tonight was the night of the regular ball at the guest house. The 3 hosts had left the guests at the hall and were gathered in this room ever since. The situation was just that unusual. Why? Because events had made them lose confidence in the Academy's extremely thorough surveillance system had happened. Because events that made them lose confidence in the Academy's extremely thorough surveillance system had happened twice in a row. Just a few hours ago, an unknown infiltrator had broken through the perfect security network to go in and out of the academy. They quickly sent an SSD after him, but right before the mate had him, she was shot and badly damaged by a presumed ally of the infiltrator, and the target had escaped.
失態というべきでしょうか。戦術級デザインの完璧な兵器として生まれた SSD がそんな人間臭い真似をしでかすとは信じがたいですが、今夜はまるで世界の底が抜けてしまったような騒ぎです。
Taigi's words had slightly irritated Tokino, the creator of the SSD, but she was unable to argue against that.
確かに潜り込んだネズミ風情が SSD から逃げ切るとはな。してやられた気分だよ。物事とは完璧にはいかないものだ。
Out of the 4 SSDs, at least one was always left to protect the academy. But tonight, they had to have another one to keep the ball secure as well. Normally, she would have sent 2 of them to handle the situation. But the infiltrator had brought about a complete unexpected and unfavorable outcome.
ネズミを逃したのは不本意だが、状況だけでも処理できたのは幸いだ。あと少しで取り返しのつかない事態になりかねなかったのだからな。
彼女の問題は重要度が高いと。
当然だろう。あれの活動を許せば、ことはスクールのみでは済まなくなる。
事後処理はどうなっている？
Kurufune finally broke his silence and asked for a
はい、
report.
理事長。ネズミがスクールのメインサーバーにアクセスした形跡がありますので、現在チェック中です。行方については処理班を編成し、追跡を続行しています。兜山みとりの処理は、コーディリアの報告通り完了しました。以後はケース B を適用し、他のクラウンメンバーへの影響を最初に。
遺体を確認するまでは完了ではない。
Kurufune was cool-headedness in human form. His voice contained no emotion, but his command was hard to ignore.
しかしコーディリアは、
物事に完璧はない。お前の言った通りだ。そしてこの問題に予期せぬ失敗は許されない。
すぐに確認いたします。
ところで先生。
Looks that Tagi wasn't even listening to have the conversation, but then she silently spoke up. He wasn't even looking into his father's eyes. His tired eyes were directed at Tokino alone.
成田真理が生き残っていたらどうするのですか？
The different kind of silence fell upon the room. Narita Shinri happened to appear at the scene of Mitori Kabutoyama's disposal. The reasons were unknown. It was hard to believe that he had broken through the academy security system, but he was definitely there and tried to protect Mitori. How wonderful. It was definitely a courageous act, well worth all the praise of the academy that put nobility above all else. However, in that situation, humanity was completely meaningless. Tokino followed the emergency protocol in order to dispose of the unfortunate student along with the target. The automatic gun they prepared for the worst cases worked perfectly. Shinri Knight displayed a few quite superhuman feats, but that Hallie hunted them down regardless.
幸か不幸か、成田真理のハローは物理干渉型の心理制圧タイプ。兜山みとり用の装備がはまってくれた。
She was basically saying that there was no chance that he'd survived.
物事は完璧とはいかないのでは？
I like how Tokyo was like, nothing could ever go wrong, and both of them just saying like, you literally just said that shit goes wrong. You sent one SSD and were confident that it would work, and it did not fucking work, and now you're trying to still be confident about this shit? Come on, woman. Think for a second. Having that used against her made Tokyo squint, but she was refined enough not to show any of her anger. Her emotions were something to be regulated.
お前も知っての通り、兜山みとりのシェイクスピア偏差値は限界だった。処理を延期できなかった理由でもある。
つまりオンスロート発症の直前だった。
そうだ。そしてコーディリアがデリート直前にオンスロート化に伴う事象変異を観測している。
では今夜兜山みとりはオンスロート化し、成田はそれに接触してしまった。
可能性は高い。成田真理は我々が長きにわたって待ち焦がれていた逸材だが、こうなってしまった以上、 やむを得ない処置だった。
Well, quite frankly, even if it's like a 40% chance to develop onslaught syndrome every time you see it, I feel like Narita could see like 1,000 cases of onslaught syndrome, dispose of them, and not develop onslaught syndrome at all. Like, I feel like Narito's just immune. I think the only thing that could have, like, ruined him was just fucking Uri, I guess. But actually, no, even she didn't, considering what we've seen in Saku's. She was speaking in past tense. This event was over to her. Truly hurt to lose a male at 12 tier HMI, or worth their weight in diamonds. However, Tokino didn't let her feelings get in the way of her decision-making and handle it rationally. HMIs that had been exposed to onslaught syndrome had to be disposed of themselves.
成田はしぶとそうですよ。
Tokino became suspicious, not because the likelihood of the possibility it brought up was close to zero, but because she smelled a hint of passion on him, which was unlike this man, who seemed tired of it all. It only lasted for a moment, though. The next moment he had to say it. Side profile, his age is a dry tree. She couldn't read his intentions at all.
同じことだ。その時はもう一度処理する。本当に残念だよ。あれだけ安定していたクラウンのメンバーからオンスロートが現れるとは。そしてその結果、2名のエトワールが欠員になるとは。
時の先生は随分と彼女たちを可愛がっていたと思っていたのですが、存外落ち着いておられますね。
私は本気でクラウンの子たちを愛している。愛とは思考の価値だ。人間である意味そのものだ。だが我々には責任がある。システムとして人類そのものの未来を愛し、プロトコルへ至る義務がある。個人の干渉よりも重要なのはシステム全体の存続だ。病気の作物を取り除いて畑全体を守るように、我々は悪種を取り除かねばならない。
責任は愛に勝るというわけですか。
愛すればこそだよ、帝大義。システムは人類を愛している。もっとも成田真理のような枠に収まらない個人も称賛すべきだ。システムは逸脱を抑圧しながら成長のために逸脱を必要とする。より良き未来とプロトコルへの到達、私たちクアドリガが目指した命題でもあった。だからなおさら成田真理が失われてしまったのは残念でならない。
奴はなぜあの場に現れた？
Tokino's words made Kurofune ask that question.
彼は変わり者です。気が向いたからと外に抜け出していたとしてもおかしいとは思いませんね。もともとスクールのルールには反抗的でしたし。
Like, who knows? Maybe he just felt like going on a moonlight stroll. It's all fucking possible, that guy.
ここがそんなに軽々しく出入りできる場所か？
不可能だというのは先入観でしかありません。可能な人材もいるところにはいる。例えばお父さん、あな。
Taigi's eyes were too cold for those of a son looking at his father. Actually, was no less of an oddball than Narita, but there was no one here who spoke against that eccentricity of his.
では成田真理は偶然居合わせただけだと？
かもしれません。僕は成田ではないので、正解は本人に尋ねてみなければ。
それでは確かめようもないな。天国へメールを送るわけにもいくまい。
Kurofune lightly squinted, but neither of them noticed. He looked at the plaque decorating the side of one of the side walls. It was the replica of the pioneer plaque that had gone on a one-way lonely journey into deep space. Kurofune then looked back at them as if nothing happened.
速やかに兜山みとりと成田真理の遺体を確認せよ。それと成田真理の背景について調査を行え。
その件でしたら彼の入学時すでに詳細な調査が。
もう一度洗い直せ。 詳細にくまなく。
Like, Tokino is just a dumb one right now. Like, there's no way anything could go wrong here. After all, I'm a genius. Bitch, everything just went wrong. Just do it again. Make sure. Leave no chance of failure here. Please. Think, woman. Your brain is of quite the high quality. Please use it for things other than being fucking cocky.
承知しました。
Jamin was frank and didn't say anything unnecessary, so not even Tokino could argue against his order. The waltz time ended, and the performers began playing an energetic march. The conductor of tonight's band, invited from the outside, was a major name that had just returned from Vienna. His skill was matched by few. It was rumored that the masters of the musical world were so busy that they didn't have time to eat, yet they visited the academy at least once every 3 months. Apparently it was because the conductor and the chairman became friends when he was in Europe. Mitori nodded to herself, thinking that a certain Sengoku general that had said people are stone walls as much as they are castles was right. Though the one the Kabutoyama family served as the Yumitori was an extremely intense person who supposedly claimed that he could take the lands of all those who had no skill in gunmanship. The clear march reaching from behind the lively invitees was powerful and intense, and sometimes clear, moving Mitori's heart in many ways. It was like a gem in sound form. She looked at the upper areas of the hall and saw that even the stern chairman had his eyes closed, enchanted by the sound. Mitori felt as though she'd seen an unexpected side of him. It seemed like something that would normally tickle his mischievous side, her mischievous side, and make her beam, but it didn't feel like that tonight.
私どうしてしまったのでしょう。
Her head was hot and everything seemed vague and superficial. There was no pain, but she was so feverish you'd think she had a cold. Unable to stay calm, she squirmed. Suddenly a sweet, enchanting feeling ran down her back like a snake coiling around her bones. So sweet that she felt she would melt. The heat so great it seemed to burn. She felt like forgetting and losing herself in that feeling. The thought of her like that made her furrow her brow and force herself to keep straight. She truly didn't feel like herself tonight. She was one of the only 5, now 6 étoiles in this academy. To the vice president of the crowns, the one in charge of the older, among all the 200 or so HMIs, such a state was most improper. It was easy for Mitori to control herself. She'd been doing it all the time. She kept herself from indulging in things and protected what she had to. That was the nature of the Kabutoyamas, and Mitori was no exception. That was what it meant to be given power. Those who had something also had all the relevant responsibilities that came with it, something the powerless common folk never had. And yet, she wanted to give herself in to the sudden surge of impulse, which embarrassed her to no end. Because of this, Mitori didn't feel like staying in the crowded air of the hall and went to the terrace to vent the heat that had built up. Somehow, all alone, she looked at the pale moon inside. She then took out her trusty fan and covered her mouth. She actually had an idea what could be causing her to be so out of it. These past 2 months were some of the busiest the academy ever had. They surely applied to the other crowds as well. Saku, Solokueru, and Tamo must have been hit by the same sudden gusts of spring wind as she had, though he was more of a storm than a wind. That thought had made her search for him among the guests gathered here. It was easy to find him. His nature made him stand out like few others. People who wouldn't mix with the crowd certainly existed. His presence alone was power. His was so great that he could destroy the whole world all by himself.
Narita. Shinri.
Uttering his name left a strange saccharine sweetness in her mouth. It was unlike the muddy, persistent passion coming over her tonight. Her Looking him made him feel oddly refreshed, as though she was looking at the open sky between the mountains and her homeland. Yet the feeling was accompanied by a stinging pain in her chest. What was this? It had never happened to her before. Mitori Kabutoyama had perfect control over herself, yet she couldn't even imagine what was happening to her tonight. Shinri Narita, a strange man, prideful, selfish person who acted like the world revolved around him. And yet he was also a man who sometimes had distant looks in his
これま
eyes.
で私の周りにはいなかった人。
Founder of the Academy, Chairman Mikado, said that HMIs were possibilities, seed that would build the future, the forefront of the world. Mitori felt as though she understood why he had summoned him here. No matter how bright and dazzling, a closed garden would be stagnant. The flowers grown in the comfort of a greenhouse can't survive in the harsh storms outside of it. Perhaps the chairman had felt that the peace was beginning to make this paradise fester.
おとなしさんは、私たちクラウンは荒れ野を耕し、小麦畑に変えるように時間をかけて。
She'd been confident that was right, but perhaps it had been a mistake. There was no end to the march of mankind. Any peace brought was followed by the battle to keep it. Even if you arrived at one goal, you had to search for a new destination. The world was moving far too fast, and stopping meant withering by the roadside. It was an endless pilgrimage towards the rainbow that could never be reached, walked with injured feet every step of the way.
それが人を滑るということ。私たちはそれを忘れかけていた。束の間の安らぎに身を委ねて、日々を保つことに精一杯になって、遠くを目指して歩き出した時の最初の心を忘れていた。
Mitori believed that that was the reason why Shinri Narita had been summoned. It was exactly like he'd said on the day she came here, to bring change to this little paradise.
どうかしたのかね。
いえ、何でもありませんわ。間近で囁かれた声で、我に返って、私は答える。彼は、びっくりするほどダンスが上手だ。欧州の社交界からの帰国子女。本場で鍛えられたのなら、さもありなんということだろうか。
Oh, it was actually not finished zooming out yet.
彼の
Oh
エス
well.
コートは力強いが、強引ではなく、優しい、スローテンポなワルツ。彼の手を取って、波間を漂うようなステップを踏む。軽く一歩。羽のように、また一歩。誘うのでもなく、導くのでもなく、私たちは、対等の位置から流れに乗る。
ふむ。どうやら君も、サクと同じで、肩の力の入りすぎている人種のようだ。たまには力を抜いてはどうかね。
なんて言い草だろう。私に向かって、そんな不遜なことを言う男性は、これまでに一人だっていなかった。無礼者と怒ってやろうか。この夜会の誰よりも態度が大きくて、でも、不思議と柔らかい、上品な声質。どうしてだろう。頬が熱を持ったようになってしまう。そんなことを知られたくなくて、でもこのまま黙っていたくなくて、ことさらに胸を張る。あら、これこのままが私の人となりですわ。生まれてよりこの方ずっとこうしてきましたの。それは本当のこと。兜山みとりが見ていたものは小さい頃からずっと同じ。何も変わらない。
九州、確か今は大変だと聞いているが。
尊大、傲慢、身勝手、自信過剰、常識知らず。同じ寮でしばらく寝食を共にして思い知った。成田真理は本当にろくでもない人物だ。こんなにろくでもないくせに、彼はとても綺麗で、時々見とれてしまう。すっと芯が通ったように、 まっすぐに立つ。人の顔を伺うこともなく、あるがままに振る舞う。そう、きっと彼は不運拙く道半ばで倒れる時も今と同じ微笑みを浮かべていくに違いない。ええ、少し前にあった災害で大きな被害が出て、まだ復興もままならないありさまで、ここでのどかに学んでいていいのかと、そんなことを思わなくもありません。それは忘れがたい記憶。何もかもが変わってしまった姿を目の当たりにした。兜山の家は私一人が実家におらずとも十二分に回ります。今も故郷を一日も早く蘇らせようと皆額に汗しておりますでしょう。故郷、それはどんなものを指すのだろう。一言で生まれた土地と言ってしまうのは簡単だ。山の形、川の形、町の形、様々な形の中にその言葉は息づいているのに違いない。四季が巡れば土地の形は変わる。人は住むために川の流れをせき止め、木々を切り倒し、荒れ野を耕す。どれだけ形が変わってしまっても、やはりそこは懐かしい故郷。私が戻ったところでさしたる力になれるわけもなし、また私のハローでは多くの人の苦難や貧しさを救えるわけもありません。私にとってここで学ぶことこそ戦いです。この学園で学び得る力は、それは間違いなく人を救う力となるでしょう。そのために今は耐えて学んでおります。
Working hard. Working hard.
ねえ、成田さん、私は知らなかったのです。大した愛着もなかったはずのあの土地にこんなにも心惹かれていたのだと。大勢の人たちがそれぞれのやり方で故郷を思っていたのだと。まるで違うものを見ている人同士が通じ合う思いを抱いている。とても不思議だと思われませんか？そして一日も早くノーブルとしてこの学園を旅立って、私は大好きな故郷に。私事のつまらない話をしてしまいました。申し訳ありません。
いや、素晴らしい話だったとも。兜山みどり、君には進むべき道が見えているのだね。
私の好みと命は故郷のために費やすのです。ええ、ですから私は幸せなのですわ。困難で長い道であれ、己の定めた進むべき道が見えているのですもの。
君はすでに学ぶべきものを学んでいるようだ。自分のために、そして誰かのために等しく生きられる者こそノーブルの名はふさわしい。君の行く道に幸あらんことを。
成田真理、とても不思議な人。真理、その名前の通りすぐそばにあるのに手に取れない。成田さんにもなすべきことがありますの？
私はずっと以前、何年も前に進むべき道を定めた。その約束は今も生きている。私は必ず果たすだろ
う。なぜだろう。穏やかな彼の口ぶりにほんの一筋の影が差していると感じるのは気のせいだろうか。わからない。私の目にも彼の真実を見極めるのは難しい。約束って 何なのですか？問いかければ答えてくれるのかもしれない。そう思いながら私は告げられない。どうしてだろう。ああ、きっと私は思っている。告げればこの宝石のような夢が終わってしまうから。
Strange and nostalgic dream of an event that had happened just a night ago reached its end in a fitting, gentle manner.
眩しい。もうそんな時間。今日は何曜日？水曜は私が朝食の当番だから。
You shall. Oh, lovely. It means I don't have to cook. The morning light leaking through the windows was slowly shifting from a soft brightness to a dazzling radiance of the coming midsummer.
今日はあと5分だけ。
Squirming in her bed didn't help much. So Mitri continued to struggle to escape the light coming in. She hid from the morning sun by covering herself with a pillow she felt in her hands. She seemed as desperate as a vampire chased away by the rooster's voice. She felt very unlike a well-bred lady, but she hoped people would allow her this much. She was never a morning person, but her body had received even less sleep than usual this time. Even in the étoile dorm, she was always the last one to wake up. Mitri belatedly came to her senses. Still below the pillow, she noticed a one-eyed glimpse around. She took a one-eyed glimpse around and tried to figure out her situation.
そうでしたわね。結局スクールには戻れなくて。
Her thoughts caught up to reality. This wasn't the étoile dorm she'd been in since coming to the academy, where she lived with her close friends. It was a room in an old, large church somewhere in Okushima. Based on what she'd been told last night, the current owner had bought this ruined place for the asking price.
まるで隠れ家みたい。
It wasn't like a hideout. After escaping last night's battle, she and Shinri Narita were actually using it as exactly that. The two 25mm chain guns let out a roar of death. The firepower released by the revived steel raptor was powerful enough to change to a forced escape. Unlike last time, there was no time to evade it. The moment they took cover behind a large tree, but it was a frail shield against such
何が
power.
起こっているの？
Despite it all, Mitori and Narita were both alive. By some miracle, to deal with the devil, the gunfire had destroyed even tanks couldn't pierce through the shield. Had Narita done something she couldn't even imagine? Due to him holding her tight, Narita's face was absurdly close. He was playing a game of chickens against despair, yet his side profile, stained by blood, was still full of composure.
どうしてこの人はそんな顔をするのだろう。
He's just like, this is really scary to be annoyed. Oh, I forgot to clean up Hanazono. Don't look over there, Mitori. There's nothing interesting over here. Just ignore this. Feeling an unexplainable heat in her cheeks, she couldn't help but wonder something like that. He was smiling exactly because he was in a desperate situation. Indomitable and proud as always, he acted as though the world belonged to him.
私のせいだ。
Narita might have been able to escape by himself. This desperate situation was Mitori's alone to begin with. He was just caught up in it. Thus, she made her decision.
あとはお任せ。そして心臓を止めた。
To be more precise, she stopped not just her heart, but dropped all her vital functions to an extremely low but manageable level. She wasn't that knowledgeable about weapons, but she had been taught the minimal amount that the nobility of the academy should know. To escape the armed helicopter, they had to hide their temperature and heartbeat from its mechanical eyes. Humans were molecular machines that worked using bones and flesh instead of gears and screws. Precise controls of this construct was an easy task for her. That was the halo, the possibility Mitri Kaputayama had been born with. Physical area type, the Tempest 7, Clockwork Sanctuary.
と言っても、無事に蘇生できるかどうかは、相当に分の悪い賭けでしたけれど。
HMIs were little more than humans. Stopped heart and blood flow made them unable to maintain their brain activity and lose their consciousness as well as subconscious. It was a question if it was possible to come back from that state using her halo. Honestly, it was far more likely that she would have just blacked out once and for all.
これまでそんな無茶をしでかしたことはなかったのに。どうして？
He escaped the censors, but the same couldn't be said for Narita. There was no guarantee that he could escape that place. And yet she believed in him. She believed that Shinri Narita would survive that dire situation as long as the hindrance vanished. And it actually happened. He survived that situation without even abandoning Mitori. He became a silent corpse. I could remember how her fading life and consciousness had made him look somewhat panicked.
初めて驚かせて差し上げましたわね。
She was enjoying it, as you could tell by the childish smile on her face. She really had done something absurd. A single mistake could have meant her death. She was afraid of death and didn't want to die. But more than that, at that moment.
私のために彼を死なせることが怖い。
Not even half a day had passed since the extremely eventful night, as her head filled with countless bubbling thoughts. Her stomach let out a sound.
なんて恥ずかしい。
This was only expected. She had been feeling all well last night, so she hadn't had much besides some orange juice. She'd only eaten lunch before that, so she hadn't had any food for an entire day now. Of course she would be hungry. Someone had once said that to live was to eat. It was a necessary part of life, and maidens like her couldn't help but feel embarrassed about it, especially after having woken up in an unfamiliar residence. She wasn't an only child, but she was still quite sheltered, so spending the night somewhere she shouldn't have was quite a misdeed in her eyes. She wanted to bury her head in her pillow and hope that it was all a bad dream, but as someone who was being chased, she couldn't wallow in idleness. Dragging her heavy body up, she tried getting up. I discovered that she was different than usual. Regions that had clear air in the mornings were truly great. That thought passed my mind as I casually walked through the hallway of the aged church. It was a bit past 9 o'clock, which might have been a bit late for morning. How dare you do this to me? I've been in many places over the past 7 years. I've been in deserts so hot they made you feel like you were melting. Summerless tundras of the north, bloody lands of war-torn countries, and lands withered by poverty. There were tragedies everywhere, but humanity was thriving no matter where I went, which was a testament to how indomitable we truly were. And as died and eliminated my presence using the breathings of Gib, checking off the gunship censored and escaped into this hideout of mine. By that time, it was already 3 in the morning. The gunship was very careful and thorough. It had stayed in the sky above for a good while after all signs of life vanished, making it quite difficult for me to escape it. Mitori's heart suddenly stopping had actually frightened me, but once we were safe, I did CPR on her and that was enough to bring her back. It was quite intriguing to find out that it had been done by Mitori's own halo. Another interesting thing was the question of how we'd survived the gunship's sudden surprise attack. It didn't make sense to me. At that moment, I definitely felt death loom over me. I certainly lacked the means of avoiding the attack. I would assume that Mitori had done something, but knowing the nature of her halo, that seemed rather unlikely.
答えの出ないことをあれこれ思案したところで意味はないか。
Ended up with many questions about what had happened, but for now it was better to focus on the current situation. Mitori had wanted to return to the academy to find out what was happening. However, knowing how fervently the academy had tried to dispose of her, that would be nothing but suicidal. I'd convinced her to hide until the situation was clear. This old church was the place we prepared for my revenge. I had all the necessities I needed for just about any situation they could be caught up in. The academy likely thought we were dead, so we would be safe here for the time being. I arrived at the room where I left Mitori to rest last night. Though she had survived, when I brought her here, she was barely conscious and couldn't even stand properly. She seemed to have been paying the price for nearly stopping her heart. She said that she only needed to rest. I believed her and chose to wait until morning. This was the room used by the priest who owned this place, and it was in a rather poor state, but it was still the best place for a guest this aged building had. We would have to talk about what we would do next. Wondering if she was awake, I listened for sounds behind the door and heard her moving around.
起きたかね、兜山みとり。
She knew it. I entered the room and knocked on the open door and saw Mitori frozen in an exciting position after having slipped out of the bed. Having just woken up, she couldn't speak properly. Wondering if the fatigue from last night had yet to leave her, I examined her from head to toe.
成田さん、どうしていきなり入ってこられますの？紳士だと思っておりましたのに、この変態！
もちろん、私は紳士だから、ノックを忘れるようなことはなく、意図的にしなかっただけだが、些細な問題だろう。
もっといけませんわ。礼節とは、人として治めるべき筋道。礼を持たぬ者は、けだものと同じです。まして、知った者同士であっても、男女の間であるならば。
なるほど、傾聴に値する哲学だ。こうして見る限り、男と女とは大きく違うものだからね。
そんなに熱心に何を見ておられますの？
She furrowed her eyebrows and followed my passionate, examining gaze.
どうして私、朝から裸？
She noticed that she was completely, thoroughly naked and made a face like that of an Eskimo hunter about to be killed by a man-eating sea lion. Her birthday suit, as some would call it, was quite a dazzling sight. It had the worst possible upbringing, but I could clearly see the quality and refinement here. Without the sin of clothing on her, she was truly shining. Oh, that was mostly due to the morning sunlight. Silky hair, slender long neck, the priceless lines from her dainty shoulders to her smallish but promising chest were simply indescribable. Elegant limbs, smooth skin that was a sign of a great upbringing. Beautifully curved hips and a behind that seemed more sizable than it had under her clothes.
Beautiful だよ。
いやー！見ないで！見てはなりません！見たら死にます！殺します！
My honest praise made Mitori scream and hide her beautiful parts.
いけない。人目から隠そうとするのは美に対する冒涜だ。美しいものには世に訴えて真美を問わねばならない義務があるのだよ。
いや、近寄らないで来ないで。どうして私こんな天裸なの？これは何かの罠？朝恥ずかしい夢なんて見たから。もうどうなってますの？
そうか。これは私としたことが気の利かない真似を。ミトリ、君の心配は全くの無用だ。
何の話をしていますの？
君がプレイメイトのグラビア級にヌーディストだったのは、深層心理の願望が無遊病として発露したからではなく、寝ているうちに脱がしておいたからなのだよ。
犯人はあなたでしたのね。最悪に最低ですわ。勝手に女の服を脱がすなんて。
一応声はかけたのだがね。しかしよほど疲れていたのだろう。目を覚まさなかった。怪我の有無を確かめなければならなかったし、ついでを言えば服も汚れていた。
それはそういう理由でしたら、事情は承知しましたから、早く出て行って。こんな格好で私、それから服は
ここに。クリーニング済みだ。
じゃあ早く出て。
退席する前に一つ言わせてほしい。安心したまえ。ここには菱屋がいる。君も昨べ会った私のメイドだが。
それでしたら、次女の方が私を。でしたら、これ以上見なければ構いませんので。 今すぐさっさと出て行って。
いや、ヒシアがやったのは服のクリーニングで、君を脱がしたのは私だ。もちろん何から何まで。
最悪、どうにもならないくらい最悪ですわ。もういいから出て行きなさい。
She grabbed the preaching stand left behind by the previous owner and threw it towards my head like a baseball. Certainly hadn't expected to see Bob Gibson here. The stand was wooden, by the way. It was over 120 centimeters in height. I lowered my head to evade it, and it hit the hallway behind me.
成田様。
ふむ、朝からはしゃぎすぎてしまったかな。
Hearing the ruckus, my loyal maid had silently appeared behind me.
そちらはよろしいのですが、ご主人様。ともかくこちらへ。
ヒシア、どうして首に腕を回すのかね。というか、喉にかかっている。この技はかのチョークスリーパー。あ、ちょっと待ちたまえ。真剣に苦しいのだが、ヒシア。
He's just fucking dying on the floor.
体の具合はどうかね。
よく休ませてもらいましたので、もう大丈夫ですわ。
The returned after being dragged away by my tasteless mate to see that. I returned after being dragged away by my tasteless mate to see that Mitri had already dressed herself. What a shame.
何かありまして？
いや、顔色はまだ良くないが、もう起きられるようになったとは。意外かつ何よりだね。
Albeit a bit awkward, Mitri was acting well within her usual range.
しかし、なんといっても昨日の今日、病は治りかけがデンジャーという。数日はおとなしく休んでいた方がいい。
昨べ助けてくださったことは、お礼の申し上げようもありません。おかげで、私は命を拾いました。
些細な問題だよ、兜山みどり。昨べも言わなかったかね。私は、自らの心情において、恥ずべき行動を取らなかっただけだ。
おかしな方ですのね。
She relaxed her stiff shoulders a bit and squinted as though looking at something dazzling.
成田さんの心情は理解いたしましたわ。ですが、これ以上私と関わっては、取り返しがつかなくなるでしょう。成田。
それについては手遅れだろう。スクールを甘く見ない方がいい。君が狙われた事実を知ってしまった時点で、連中にとっては、私も処理すべき対象だ。
I'd already almost died along with her. If I was idiotic enough to return there, I'd simply be met with a cliche, out of the frying pan and into the fire situation. She United also had some other circumstances. She asked me why I was out last night. It might end with the exposure of my original goal at the academy, the revenge of the 4 traitors. I feared that the situation became unsalvageable the moment the moment I saved Mitri. And now I had no choice but to change my original plan of killing Kurofune from inside the academy.
成田さん、私の事情に巻き
勘違いしてほしくないのだが、ミトリを救ったことに悔いはない。
The very idea of weighing my situation against the life of a maiden was foul. What point was there to life if you abandoned what you believed in? Regret was a killer.
君の事情に巻き込まれたのではなく、私自身が君の事情に飛び込んだのだ。ミトリが責任を感じる必要は何もない。私の行いは私のものだ。己が成した結果であれば、どんなものであれ引き受けよう。それは紛れもなく、私がこの意志で選び取った決断なのだから。
It was enough to make the regret in her eyes melt and fade away.
承知しました。では、私も成田さんのことは気にせず。
Don't think, feel.
What?
とある偉大な思想家の言葉だ。君にこの言葉を送ろう。時にはあれこれ思い悩むよりも、 感じるままに生きることが大事な場面
I know
だ。
that's an actual like saying and all that and shit like that, but don't think, feel just sounds stupid. Say it properly. Don't think, feel. Not like it's all like just don't like period, think period, feel period. Like it doesn't feel like it's like either that there's like another period between the don't and think, or the period between think and feel is just gone. One of the two. Just
Don't think, feel.
also it's just like 5 E's in feel.
美しい言葉ですのね。
同感だね。私のお気に入りの一つだよ。さて、込み入った話は後にしよう。今朝いい食材が手に入ったので、ついでに朝食を用意してきたのだよ。君が起きていてくれたので、無駄にならなくてよかった。まずは食べなければ治るものも治らない。久しぶりに腕を振るった。回復に効果のある特別な料理だ。君の口に合えばいいが。
腕を振るった。成田さんが作られたんですの？
She opened her eyes wide and looked at me as if it was unexpected. I'd cooked for myself at the Twelve dorm a couple of times, but in most cases Soroko always made enough for all of us. Never had a chance to show off my cooking skills to the lovely maidens.
幼い頃の私には、ろくでなしと二人っきりで暮らしていた非常に残念な時期があってね。むさ苦しい上に、自分のことも何一つしない無駄飯ぐらいを養うために、料理やその他、一通りは身につけざるを得なかったのだよ。最近では、菱屋が全て取り仕切ってくれるおかげで、腕は鈍るばかりだ。楽とは罪深いものだよ。私の料理の腕前は不安だろうか。
喜んで堪能させていただきますわ。
それはよかった。では。
I prepared the food like a skilled butler, a napkin for the maiden, a tray next to the bed, carried the dish with due respect, and took off its cover before her.
成田さん！これは一体何ですの？
Exposed by cooking, Mitori reacted with the kind of joy one would expect within the gap of sanity and madness as displayed in Goya's masterpiece, Saturn devouring his son.
見ての通り、蜂の油炒めだよ。これはいささか我流だが、元は中国は雲南省の料理らしいね。どうして何年も前の話だ。その頃の私は動くものならトカゲでもネズミでも食べたが、一つだけ生理的にダメだったものがある。
そうじゃなくて、蜂なんですの？
だから蜂の話をしているのだよ。私は蜂だけは食べられなかった。他のものならサソリでもクモでも大丈夫だが、蜂だけはどうしてもダメだったのだ。
Recalling the anguish and lamentation of my younger days, I shook my head like a criminal looking up at the sky in despair. Ugh, the memory was vexing.
だが、あのろくでなしは、私が剣をしていると知ると、喜び勇んで、体にいいのだと嘘吹きながら、この料理を私の口に押し込んだ。私は幼心に報復を誓った。
そんなどうでもいい昔話は聞いておりません。
栄養価が非常に高かったのは事実だった。私は苦しい時にこの料理に救われた。というわけだから、ミトリ、君も食べるといい。今は栄養をつけなければな。
は？
Mitori froze in place. Her face went from pale to blue. This was bad. She really seemed to be in quite a sorry state.
ますますこれを食べたまえ。体にいい。
I spoke to the injured, confused maiden with the most gentle voice I could muster.
クラウンの自責ともあろうものが、子供のようなわがままを言うものではないよ。君は一日も早く回復したいのではないのかね。ならば、これを食べることぐらい、大した問題ではないはずだ。
The government is bees.
こんな時だけ筋の通ったいい話みたいに言われましても。
そうか。どうしても抵抗するというなら仕方ない。乙女に手荒い真似はしたくなかったが。
何をなさるつもりですか？やめて！近寄らないで！いや悪魔！鬼畜けど！変質者！
Went on to push Mitri and hold him down. She tried to resist in spite of her state, but despite me pinning her down with little force, I was actually targeting vital points I learned from yoga, rendering her completely immobile.
口を開いて、よく噛んで味わって食べなさい。
嫌です！死にます！こんなもの食べるくらいなら舌を噛みます！あなたを殺して私も死ぬ！いいえ！やっぱりあなただけ死んでください！
さあ、
このクズが。
The voice behind me was colder than the icy breath of Wendigo from Canadian legend, and it froze myself and Mitri still in our heartwarming grapple.
ヒシアか。相変わらず端的かつ明快で素晴らしいね。
Seemed to have brought our morning coffee for us. The pot of the cart had fragrance about it that truly roused an
ご
appetite.
主人様も変質的行為に励んでおられるようで、ヒシアとしては呆れるを限界突破して殺意を覚えてしまいます。ご主人様がキチピーなのはよく存じておりましたが、よもや病床の女性に力ずくでことに及ぼうとする。
心外だな。これは彼女にとって必要な食料なのだよ。
女を泣かせる治療がどこにありますか？
ふむ。愛すべき我が次女よ。君はグッドドラッグはハイになるという有名なことわざを知っているかね？
I tried to justify my position, but my wise maid thoroughly ignored me.
よしよし、大丈夫でございますよ、カブト山様。悪はヒシアが締めておきますので。
成田さんが私を凌辱しようと。
Pushed me to the edge of the room. Hishia embraced the crying girl. The scene looked as grandiose as religious painting. As a religious painting.
時にヒシア。クズはともかく悪呼ばわりには納得いかないのだが。
Tried to make her correct herself, but it appeared that I had no place in the microcosm they created. The three of us went on to eat the proper food prepared by Ishia. The cooking I'd painstakingly made had been refused, but the concept of throwing food away didn't exist in my dictionary, so I figured Ishia and I would eat it later. The food Ishia made was nasi lemak, a national dish of Malaysia. I blew up Malaysia. Like I cannot read the name Malaysia anymore without immediately thinking that scene, and it's just so fucking funny to me. Like, why you two police officers? I blew up Malaysia. Like you'd expect of Asian cuisine, it was a rice dish. It was special because the rice was cooked in coconut milk. It had a dense, sweet fragrance. I could taste and I could feel the sweetness of the milk spreading on my tongue along with the softness of the rice.
ほう、これは濃厚な甘さだね。
本日の味付けは黒砂糖を加えて甘味を増してあります。
I wouldn't expect less of my maid. Sweetness worked against fatigue. It was a good choice, considering our state. Before meeting me, she hadn't known much of cooking besides throwing an animal she hunted over a fire. Now her cooking repertoire was that of a skilled chef. A few years truly did change people. I continued eating, savoring every bite. The unique sweetness was quite addicting, and I wasn't sure it would suit Japanese tastes.
どうかね、ミトリ。
美味しい。口の中でとろりと溶けて。
Said past her standards. Isha seemed glad to hear that as well. In Malaysia, this was often eaten with a sauce called sambala. Chicken meat or eggs. today, out of consideration for Mitori's state, Ishia kept the spiciness to a minimum. There were eggs and fruits on the side, and the drinks were some well-fitting orange juice.
ふむ、どうかしたのかね、緑。手を止めてじっと私の顔を見ているようだが、料理が冷めてしまう。
成田さん、本当に美味しそうに召し上がられますのね。まるで子供みたいに。
人は感情の生き物だ。常にありのままを評すのが良いとは限らないが、素直でいられる時にはそうあるべきだと思うのだよ。うまい料理とは人生における最も有意義な楽しみの一つなのだしね。奥島のような地方の土地でこれだけの材料を整えて供するとは、さすがは菱屋だ。
奥島では品揃えのいい朝市をやっております。その名もぼったくり朝市。朝から少し遠出になりましたが、極つぶしの主人の後始末をするのに比べれば、そりゃもう簡単でございます。
Ishia seemed quite unsatisfied with her master this morning. Breakfast ended, and it was time for the what mattered. After cleaning up a bit, Ishia left, and I got down to business.
今後のためにいくつか質問させてもらってよいかね。
私は救われた身。答えられることでしたら包み隠さずお話ししますわ。
3サイズであれば聞くまでもなく分かっているとも。上から83、56、85。ちなみに最近お尻がサイズアップした。
なんでどうして知ってるんですの？
この私の慧眼をもってすれば、服の上からでもサイズを見抜くことなどたやすいことだよ。
まったく笑い事ではありませんわ。そんな目潰してしまった方が世の女性のためなのでは？
さて、個人的に尋ねたい乙女の秘密は山のようにあるが、それは後回しにするとして。後で
聞くつもりです
の？昨べも尋ねたが、狙われる理由に心当たりは？状況から判断すれば、あの襲撃は綿密なプランに沿った行動だ。
The gunship from last night seemed to be a direct countermeasure against Mitori. Not even the academy could prepare something like that so fast, which could only mean that they had been preparing for such disposal ahead of time. Faced it again with the truth she didn't want to accept, Mitori pursed her lips.
私が教えてほしいくらいです。時の先生が私を殺そうとなさった理由なんて。
Mitori was wise and knew that her dear teacher was behind it, but her tone made it clear how conflicted she was about it. It didn't seem to me that she was lying or hiding anything. She really didn't know why this was happening.
ではもう一つ。あれは何かね。
Me bringing up the matter impossible to dance around made Mitori's shoulders shiver. It was impossible. It was obvious what I meant by that was the change, the transformation that had befallen her. She remained the same in form, but had become something far from human.
あれを何と言えばいいのか。正直に言うと、よく覚えていない部分も多くて。
Despite that, she knew well that something wasn't right. Disgraceful maiden wasn't one to break easily, but now she hung her head with eyes full of tears. Perhaps it was so inhuman that she didn't understand it, like code written in a different programming language. I hadn't known her for long, so it was hard for me to say that I knew Mitori Kabutayama well. Even so, I was certain that the being she'd briefly become yesterday was unnatural and quite unlike her. Disgust that seemed to corrupt the very core mixed with the sweet numbness that seemed to coil around me. It was tempting to the point of making me want to bear myself despite the knowledge that it would kill me like a serpent's venom. Merely remembering it made a chill go down my spine. I've been through many things before returning to Japan, but I hadn't seen anything like that before.
HMI にまつわる特殊な状況ではないのかね。似たようなケースを聞いたことはないだろうか。
スライダー症というものはあります。ハローが人体に及ぼす悪影響の一つで、成長段階のハローの制御不全が引き起こす精神疾病の一種とされていて。
スライダー症を発症した者はどうなる？
自制心や社会性を失い、社会秩序にとって危険な状態になります。他者、特に同類の、つまり HMI への強い攻撃衝動を発揮して危険ですから。
Mitri fell silent for a moment before continuing.
おとなしさんと私たちクラウンが県の対策本部から依頼を受けて対処に当たっておりました。
噂に聞いたコレオグラフの中身か。
Field practical exams were a special part of the curriculum in which the only participants were 12-tier HMIs. They were crowns to be precise. Soroko told me about them, but as one who refused to be part of the crowns, I wasn't given the details. Mitori's words were true. The field practical exams were actually executions. Superpowers could only be countered by other superpowers. It wasn't true. It was actually just an idea that many of those who had superpowers believed. The greatest strength of superpowers was the usage of logic that didn't adhere to the standard. That was it. It was like taking out a knife in a boxing match. It was dangerous, but if you knew the knife was coming, you had ways to deal with it. Even out-of-control HMIs were mere individuals that could easily be dealt with by serious authorities and systems. Dealing with sliders would actually be easier if it was left to the well-trained peacekeepers than the crowns. If there was a reason to leave it to the crowns, it was the fact that it was easier to conceal when less people were involved. That it could be used as a political statement. HMIs can clean up after themselves, so your safety is guaranteed. But I felt that there were other reasons. What if this was part of Kurofuni's philosophy? It could have been a harsh lesson given to the would-be nobility, meant to give them the resolve to dirty their hands. At the very least, because these exams, the maidens of the crown weren't merely decorations. They actually had experience in battle.
あれはスライダー症とは別のものだと？
見知っているものを見間違えるほど、私は節穴ではないつもりですわよ。
That wasn't it. We had no real clues. This could only mean that there were no more secrets to HMIs than met the eye. Was it a problem with just Mitori Kutiyama? It was shared by all HMIs. That would change a lot. For all we knew, this could be something that affected me too.
答えの出ないことをあれこれと無駄に思案するのは性に合わない。今後の話をするとしよ
う。How the fuck would Slider work for him anyways? Not Slider, Onslaught. Like, the only Onslaught cases we've seen are, like, people that can actually, like, murder. Effectively. Namely, Saku. You know, we've seen what happens in there. It was round. Then Sorako, we know that she can just, like, end things with her ability. And now Mitri, who has her fucking, like, spears. But what the fuck would happen if Hamlet 12 were to reach Onslaught Syndrome? Because Hamlet 12 is just, yes. Man, I sure would like to eat cereal for breakfast. Oh wait, that's what he told me. Yet it sounds like a really fucking good idea right about now. Like, how the fuck would that work? It's just a command spell. Unless he can just go, like, die. And fucking heart just stops. Which would be fucking busted, actually. The fuck?
ゆうべも話したが、我々はしばらくの間ここで身を隠す。
私はできるだけ早くスクールに
戻るのはどう考えても危険だ。
承知しております。ですが、おとなしさんたちも私と同じ目に遭わないとは限らない。今起きていることの真実を確かめるには、時の先生に直接問いただすのが一番ですもの。
She looked roused, more like concerned. Before she could continue, I opened my mouth.
君のクラウンとしての責任感と友人を思う心には敬意を表する。できることならその意思を尊重したいが、一つ、スクールは君の処理に手段を選んでいない。
They even released a gunship on her. What had happened in an empty area with the ruckus caused, it would be hard to create a cover-up for it. It could definitely be noticed by the academy students at least. They tried to dispose of Mitori despite such risks. That meant that to them, it was a priority that came above all else. How would they go that far?
敵の意図も目的も不明のまま無理にスクールに戻るのは虎穴に飛び込むようなものだろう。
それは成田さんのおっしゃる通りでしょう。でもそれが一つ目ということは他にも理由がありますのね。
Sharp she was, Mitori picked up on what I said.
二つ、君の体のことだ。君の胸は決して見事な豊満ではないが、小ぶりながら未来の可能性が詰まっている。そう、未来豊満だとは思わないかね。
いきなり
もちろん君の体の話だと。
そんな限定的な体の話がどこにありますか。
ならば胸の聖なる豊満へ至る可能性の話だ。この世には豊満ほど価値あるものはまたとない。
わかりましたわ。成田さん、あなたは気が違う方なのですね。
正気のありかなどという些細なことで私の進行の邪魔はできない。昨べも意識のない君を脱がすとき、事のついでに胸を揉んだが。揉んだ？
また揉んだんですの？それも事のついで。そんな存在に許されざるハレンチ行為をなさったんですの？
それだけ元気なら体は思いのほか正常のようだね。昨べの触れた感触では異常が出ていてもおかしくないと思ったが。
触れて。
She made a surprised, almost shocked face, but that was nothing special. Irregularities in the bodies always showed signs, instead of evidenced by the effectiveness of medical examination.
胸の是非を測るのに私が過つことはないよ。
胸の話はもう結構ですので。
そうかね。ではそれも後回しにするとして、昨べのミトリの体には異常があった。
それは
責めているのではないよ。自分の意志でそうあるべきと望んだなら私が口を挟むべき理由はない。だが学園に戻るとなれば話が別だ。万全でないままではそれこそ無駄死にに行くようなものだろう。さらに君は爆弾すら抱えている。昨べのような事態が万一学園の中で起これば。
それは
She seemed calm, but that was proof that she wasn't. Under normal circumstances, she would have come to that conclusion without me pointing it out. The abnormal transformation from last night was something we knew next to nothing about. It was unlikely that it would happen again after return. It wasn't unlikely that it would happen again after return to the academy. Would it be possible to stop her again? We stopped her last night thanks to a stroke of luck. There was nothing to suggest that I couldn't do it again. That I could do it again. I mean, considering how serious the academy was about disposing her, it could mean that her transformation, the reason for her disposal, were connected. Turning there without a plan was far too reckless.
君の処理は予定された行動だった。スクールは以前から同じようなことを密かに行っていたのかもしれない。だとすれば早急に策たちが窮地に陥ることはないと思う。状況はこれまでと変わっていないのだからね。時には耐えることも必要だ。荒れ狂う嵐の夜にも朝は来る。
わかりましたわ。おっしゃる通り、ここに身を潜めて、真実を突き止めましょう。でも、体でしたら、もう何ともありませんのよ。
She raised her slender arms and flexed to demonstrate her wellness. Soft pale skin akin to orchids, grown from with all the care in the world. She seemed so frail, a single touch could break her, but there was a certain strength within it.
確かめてもいいだろうか。
どうぞ、お好きなだけ。
And he goes for the tea. With the permission given, I went and fondled. I judged them as my faith had led me to. First with force, then gently. I kneaded them, then pushed them together and moved them around.
おお、素晴らしい。小ぶりだが、内に秘めた良感と未来の可能性が素晴らしい。夕べのも絶品だが、意識のある時のものはさらに良い。
いやー、どうして胸を揉みますの？
Main's voice resounded like the bell of blessing. After leaving Mitori's room, I met up with Hisha at the hall.
ご主人様、左の頬に見事なハンドマークが。
素晴らしい美の精髄に思わず避けるのも忘れてしまうほどだったのだよ。
I looked at the mirror and saw a palm-shaped pink mark on my face.
こちらも素晴らしいね。ミトリは手首のスナップの効かせ方が一流だ。
Like, damn, she got one hell of a wrist!
いっそ、右の頬も打たれてくれば、ご主人様の頭脳も多少はまともになったかもしれません。残念です。
After listening to that response from my dear maid, I exhaled a brief breath.
厄介だな。
兜山様は、狙われる心当たりがないとのことですが、隠し事をされている可能性は？
私は彼女の放慢へ至る可能性を信じているよ。
そんなものを信じるご主人様の脳みそが賞味期限切れなのをヒシアは固く信じておりますが、まあさまつなことでしょう。
Moved by my greatness, Hisha shrugged in an American fashion.
一応ご主人様のたわごとを信じるとして、そうなると問題はこちらの予定に支障が出ることですね。
The fact that Narita had vanished out of the academy without permission would make them suspect that I was involved in Hanazono's infiltration. It was now only a matter of time until Kurofune and Tokino found out who I truly was.
済んだことだ。内から攻めるのが無理なら城ごと落とす。
No matter how insanely difficult that was, Shinri Narita would still do what he had to.
だが今は乙女のことが第一だ。逃げた鳥を追って狐が巣から出てきてくれるなら手間も省けるがな。
では兜山様を餌に。
I didn't want to do something as bored as involving an innocent girl in my acts, but considering how fixated they were last night, it was likely that they would send people after her until her death was fully confirmed. While we waited in the city and Kurofune wanted to avoid attention, he couldn't take any drastic measures. If I killed panicked foxes he'd send after me, Kurofune would be left with less defense. Protecting Mitori brought me closer to my goal.
一石二鳥を狙うとしよう。時にヒシア、例のものの調査は？
何分勝手のわからないこの国でスクールの息がかかっていない医者の人選は厄介でしたが、奥島には筋のいい仲介屋がおりましたので、その男に任せました。数日で結果は出るものと。
上出来だ。
まだ新品の匂いでいっぱいの特別教室に入る。真新しいプラスチックとビニール。乾いたばかりの塗料。何もかもが眩しい。ありきたりな表現だけど、本当に輝くよ。人のいる教室を一望すると、とてもおかしな気分。30人近い人数がいるのに、先週末に完成したばかりの特別教室の席は、まだ4分の1も埋まっていない。自分が故郷にいた頃に学んでいた場所は、 ここよりもずっと人数が少なかった。転入したばかりだから目に映るすべてが新鮮で胸が躍る。故郷とここではいろいろな面で違っていて、それがいちいち興味深い。違いは空気だろうか、それとも時間の進み方？もっと単純に自分が馴染んでいないだけかも。良さそうな席を探しながら左手で抱えたノートの位置を直した。ノートとはここスクールで使うタブレット型携帯端末のこと。普通の学園で使う教科書とノート両方の役割が学生それぞれに与えられる端末一つで賄われる。受け取ったばかりでまだ使い慣れない機器には自分の名前がローマ字で彫られている。K-A-B-U-T-O-Y-A M-A-M-I-T-O-R-I カブト山みとり。
I feel like they either forgot the Ma from Kabutoyama or the Mi from Mitori. Either that or I'm going insane.
K-A-B-U-T-O-Y-A M-A-M-I-T-O-R-I カブト山みとり。
Okay, no, they didn't forget it. It just said it all in one with like a really weird pauses. They like put a pause here.
特別教室
Whoops,
は
fuck.
全部で
Like put a
22ある。
pause here and a pause here. Like started here, pause here, and pause here. That was fucking weird.
この教室はそう、音楽室だ。音楽は選択科目。ここにもごく普通の学園めいたところがあるのだ。スクールの存在を初めて聞かされたとき、陰惨で狭苦しい収容所のようなイメージを抱いたのに、実際に目の当たりにすると正直毒気を抜かれた。清潔で綺麗で平和で穏やかな場所。ここはちょっとした楽園だ。この光さす庭の創設者は HMI を人類の未来を切り開く新たな可能性、ノーブルと呼ぶ気高く尊いものなのだと。そして私カブト山みとりは全国から集められた多くの HMI からさらに選び抜かれた最高位エトワールの称号をいただく。見知らぬ人たちの座る階段式の教室の通路を物おじせずに渡っていく。胸を張って顎を引いて天下のバラのように咲きながら歩みは決して急がず慌てず、すれ違う学生の何人かは時折こちらを見て目を奪われたようにハッとして、それから怖いものでもいるように慌てて顔を伏せる。カブト山家の娘としては珍しくもない。手の届かない高嶺の花を見るような眼差し。あんな学生がいただろうかと気になっても声をかけようとする勇気の持ち主はいなかった。生まれの貴賤は所詮天からのギフト。自分を支える誇りにはなるが人の価値を左右しない。人間の価値はそのものの内側にある。臆病は見苦しい守られるべきただ人であるならまだしも、ここの席についているのは力を与えられたものだというのに、私はただ一人自らを律して歩く。そこへ
あなたが新しい転入生？
清廉と澄み渡る声。予想もしなかった。突然呼びかけられるなんて。ほんの少し驚いて振り返れば、ぬばたまをすいたかのような色。 まっすぐに落ちていく長い黒髪。濡れた瞳の色は常盤色。潜在に変わることなく深く濃い。何の恐れも後ろめたさもなく見つめてくる。彼女の髪と同じでさして珍しくもない色なのに目を奪われた。
That was our meeting with Sako Tanashi. Again, the fucking new scene was over here. For some reason, Mitori reminisced about her first days at the academy. Did her friends believe that she died? Were they worried about or bled for her? She wanted to return to the academy as soon as possible, but she understood that now it was time to hide. The academy was a secluded place. All contact from the outside was thoroughly checked. She informed her friends that she was alive. They might send pursuers after her. Tokino had tried to dispose of her along with Narita, who had come to save her. There was no guarantee that the same wouldn't happen to the other crowns when they learned that Mitori was well. Thus she had no choice but to bear it.
成田真理。
The name escaping her lips sounded sweet, but was also filled with the pain of doubt and a profound shadow. It was a transfer student from a distant land. Narita was a mysterious person from the start. The better she knew him, the more suspicious he seemed to become.
それにしても目ざとい方ですわ。
Like Narita had noticed, Mitori's body had been worn out by last night's events. When she'd woken up today, she realized that her right arm and left leg couldn't move. She couldn't even feel them. Some of her organs hadn't recovered yet either. You could say that she was still about 30% dead. She hadn't done anything that absurd before, so she didn't know if this was permanent or if it would go away.
私のハローのことは尋ねられなかったけれど、あの分では見当くらいはついているかもしれない。おとなしさんや桂木さんばかりか。とうとう私まで救われてしまいましたわね。
There was something that truly surprised her. Narita was a shady person, but he seemed to have won over both Sorako and Eru. Sorako was a nice girl, but with Eru being so difficult, Mitori certainly hadn't expected that. To her, Eru was just a fellow crown. Wasn't just a fellow crown, but it's one friend one rarely had.
そう、趣味の世界はどこまでも奥深いものなのですもの。
Back when Mitori enrolled, Eru wasn't étoile but a soulless tier cavalier. Eru had been even more unbalanced back then, and her actions had created many inexplicable problems. She was friendly towards her fellow crowns now, but at the core she remained uncaring of others. More like she didn't even care about caring. And Mitori knew this well. The fact that Eru would let Narita slide was surprising to Mitori, the girl who wasn't one to make concessions. To Mitori, for the girl who wasn't one to make concessions. Narita's nature remained murky. Considering what he had done last night, it might have been fair to assume that Tamo's instincts were right about him.
こんな建物まで用意していて、彼は一体何をするつもりなのかしら。
An old church. There was a spire-like hall in the middle of these grounds. Behind it, there was a two-floored living space. There were walls all around, making it difficult for anyone to come close. The gates to this church were shut tight as well. There were curtains on all the windows, thoroughly denying the Japanese concept of beautiful relationships with one's neighbors. It wasn't unlikely that the nearby people didn't even know that someone had moved here. The room Mitri was given was on the second floor, and though it seemed to be a piece of history, it was too damaged in age to be used as a permanent living space. Mitri Kaputiyama was the daughter of a famous family where she had come from. She had lived at a grandiose manor first, then the stylish academy. By her standards, this old building was better off demolished. person who bought this at the asking price either had no talent for business or had some other reason to buy it. She'd heard that the previous owner, despite being a clergyman, was quite an eccentric, but to her mind, the current owner was far more warped. To be more direct.
うさんくさいのだ。彼。
She calmed down and looked around the room once again. The room was clean, but the well-used dresser, cabinet, and posters on the wall were all signs of life in here. It was probably just as the previous owner had left it.
ここに住むつもりで買い取った。と言われると、いよいよ正気を疑ってしまう。こんなところで、一体何をしているのだろう。
Mitori believed that he might have been scheming. She didn't want to think so badly of the person who saved her and her friends.
彼が何者でも、私は、兜山みとりの本分を尽くすだけですわ。彼は彼。私は私。私は、兜山みとりなのだから。
After staying inside for about 2 days, I went outside to look around and finish some business. You know what? I feel like Mitori's halo is less just, yes, these spears that do shit, but more like, actually no, that wouldn't explain why she could just explode the fucking thing. Let the fucking helicopter. Actually, I'm not sure. Forget what I was saying.
ふむ、死人を相手に律儀なことだな。
I walked around the station at the center of town and noticed some people who didn't seem to belong in this silent rural area. They were well camouflaged, looking like local men and housewives, but it wasn't enough to fool me. I could sniff out the wolves in sheep's clothing by their footsteps. They were orderly and fixed. There was no unnecessary weight in them. They were footsteps exclusive to people who'd gone through specialized training.
黒船め、こちらが生き延びたのに気づいたか。
It was possible that he was just being thorough, but couldn't allow myself to be optimistic. It was Kurofune, so it was best to assume the worst. Considering the situation, it was good that I came instead of Ishia. She stood out too much after all. I fixed the large hat I procured as part of my camouflage and left their line as a sight, acting as if nothing had happened. I went to the promised place I had business in, where I found the designated object. The part next to the river, there was a bright pink van with adorable animated character illustrations on the sides. The battlefield, it was uncommon for veterans to mark their beloved weapons or vehicles. It was an expression of affection and pride as a living being that would expire by tomorrow. According to Ishia, some members of the common society in Japan did something similar. It was supposedly a spiritual act. The colorful, lovable print of a girl the owner found attractive made the van into a sacred relic some in Japan would call a cringe-mobile. It seemed like a powerful title indeed. For all I knew, it might have had a ritualistic meaning linked to deeper wisdom. This van also doubled as a stall. It was a standard weekday, so there was no one in line, and I stood right before it. The man there was as tall and lanky as pampas grass and had hair reaching his shoulders. He certainly didn't seem like someone from a rural town such as this. The urban areas would suit him far better. He had good looks, and the eyes under his fancy red-framed glasses were full of wisdom, but the grin on his face had completely spoiled it. He seemed shady, but to put it bluntly, he looked like he would laugh in his. My prior evaluation was unfitting. He wasn't one for urban areas. He would be at a home engaging in marriage fraud.
メイド女の代わりだ。
Once he gave him the password, the man pointed at the menu, clearly telling me to buy.
このメープル名門金時クレープを3つもらおう。
It was a crepe stall, so I ordered 3 as a little something for Mitori and Ishia. Crepes had their roots in Bretagne, France. They were known to be a type of thin pancake. It was said that they had their start when porridge fell on some hot rocks. The wife of Louis the 13th had taken a liking to it, and it became a royal dish. Because of the ease of eating, they could have all kinds of toppings, including chocolate, fruits, or sausages. With fast movements, he spread out the dough and cooked it. He topped it with sweet potatoes, cream, and maple syrup. He was actually quite skilled. Once I had 3 crepes, I paid the money and left. After thoroughly checking that I wasn't being watched, I examined the micro-memory drive that he'd given along with the purchase. According to Hishio, the one in the van was the famous local mediator she mentioned. The report on what we wanted investigated had come 2 days earlier than expected. Someone secluding himself in the middle of a rural town, he was quite skilled. If he was that good, he surely had options in his life other than living here. For all I knew, he might have had some profound reasons. That wasn't something I could look into. The only things desired of pros were trust and results, and he certainly provided both. I used my mobile to check the content of the memory drive. What I'd asked him to investigate was Mitri Kabutayama's blood. To extract somebody she was unconscious, thinking that it could lead us to the nature of the abnormal transformation. It wasn't gentlemanly of me not to tell her, but for all I knew, the results could have been the kind I couldn't tell her. I was confident in my ability to read quickly. Though it was full of specialized language, going through this report took me less than 30 seconds. However, I needed several times more that to accept what was written.
これは想像以上の厄介になりそうだな。
To think that something could make even me feel dispirited. Taking a long detour to shake away any potential followers, I returned to the church. I was alert the whole way back. Though there weren't any pursuers around the church, it seemed like they would find this place before long. Kurofune's long arm would reach me soon.
お帰りなさいませ、ご主人様。
市内には狐がうろついていた。
おう、それは黒船の野郎めの手のものだと。
He understood me without me saying anything and made a troubled grimace.
今後は外出にも気をつけねばならないな。こういう時には主に混じってしまえぬ我が身の偉大さを悔いるばかりだよ。
まあ、すごくいいものとすごく悪いものは紙一重と申します。ご主人様がどっち側かは筆やあえて言いませんが。
もちろん私ほどの市場に勝るのは神のもたらした偉大なる宝満のみだ。ともかく外出の際は菱屋も十分注意するように。
確かに菱屋のなりは古都奥島では目立ってしまいますから。
Perhaps it would have been different in Akihabara, the holy land of maid culture, but it was natural for her to stick out here. Some would suggest a change of clothes, but since she wasn't from Japan, that wouldn't help.
隠れ家もいつでも引き払えるよう準備しておきます。
I truly appreciated her resourcefulness. Kurofune had a long reach. If needed, he could even influence the local police. That meant that we basically had to face the system, the country itself. Organizational power, vast human resources, authority, these things could easily overwhelm the individual. However, the Academy was still an educational and research institution. It didn't have the capacity to mobilize that many people, meaning that there was an opening for me to take advantage of.
腑に落ちないことがある。
ご主人様の性癖が変態なのは今に始まったことではないと菱屋。
私の宝満への愛は性癖ではなく信仰だよ。今の疑問はそこではなく黒船の手ぬるさについてだ。仮に私とミトリが生きているかもしれないと疑問を持ったならどうしてスクールの HMI を動員しない？
兜山様を処理しようとしているのが知れると内部の統制に困るのでは。
He had a point. I had thought before it was hard to believe that Mitri was the only one to be disposed. It was reasonable to believe that this had happened before, that it would happen again.
策をはじめクラウンの乙女らにはそんないかがわしい秘密の影はなかった。彼女らは何も事情を知らされていないのだろう。
That added up, but something didn't seem right. Tokino and Kurofune had 1 or 2 special pawns among the students that they would use in emergencies. Why weren't they dispatched too? This is as if...
この一件に学生たちを近づけてはならないとでも言うようだな。 それと仲介屋から受け取ったデータだ。
イシアが拝見してもよろしいのですか？
君の意見を聞かせてほしい。
傲慢、わがまま、自分勝手マンの成田様が、これはまた珍しく弱気なことを。
I gave it a moment with the report. While she read what was written, I spent time watching the passion displayed on the stained glass. The chapel. It had been said that the child of the Lord had taken all the sins of the earth and walked the path of sins himself. Nothing suited Shinri Narita less than prayers for forgiveness.
この報告書は、マジですか？
私も鵜呑みにはしがたいが、ヒシアの人を見る目を信用しているよ。
The report said that this would require further investigation, but the most important bit was that they discovered that Mitori's space genetic sequence wasn't like that of a normal human. Basically, the conclusion was that Mitori Kabutoyama wasn't human.
人間ではなくなりつつあると言った方が正解か。
イシア、びっくりざます。こう変化球で来るとは。ベントラーと唱えてみるのも一興では。
Was this the secret the Academy was hiding? But it could have caused such a drastic change that it changed the very genes.
HMI としての機能、つまり超常の力とはどこから来たのか。
と言われますと。
This was less a hypothesis or theory, and more like a stray basis fantastical idea. Like standard superpowers, Halo could be passed on to offspring. Just like you could trace all of humanity to a single group of Cro-Magnons. The Halo also had their first. What if, hypothetically, it was something born from a lineage quite unlike mankind?
あるいは、それこそがこの星の歴史の未だ隠された重大な1ページなのかもしれない。
大行な話になってまいりました。
The monotone voice, while scratching her ear, my dearest maid thoroughly denied my idea.
私は高尚な歴史の真実について考察しているのだよ。知性に敬意を払いたまえ。
世間に敬意ナッシングで我が道を行く主人に仕えているもので、医師や無作法で申し訳ありません。要するに、ご主人様的に HMI の特徴は別のどっかから入り込んだものではないかでございますか？
古来 HMI の血統は鬼や天狗など様々な怪異として扱われてきた。伝承が一部に真実を含んでいることはよくある。まさに伝承の通りに HMI の血統とは鬼や天狗などと称された何かを迎え入れた人間の残りがなのだとすれば。
That would make it likely that Mikado was the same.
だから、どうした。事実であれ妄想であれ。この身に流れる血がどんなものかなど。私はここにある。なすべきことをなすために。
Doesn't change what Shinri Narita would do at
成田
all.
様、この件、兜山様には。
That was that problem too.
こんな夜更けに女性の部屋をノックなさる礼儀知らずは一体どなたかしら？
夜分に失礼する。兜山みとり。
Ended after waiting for her to reply. It was late. It really was late at night right now. She was getting ready to go to bed.
夢の時間に入る前に少しばかり冒険に繰り出す勇気はあるかね？
今からですの？
チャンスは突然訪れるものだよ。
Rode the bike Hishi had prepared. Mitri sat behind me and we both went on a little pre-sleep adventure. There was a pale moon above, as I'd expected of an early summer night. The brilliant light was there just as it had been during my 7 years of wandering. The moon looked like the face of a merciful goddess that embraced both earth's light and misery with its calm smile. After After 10 minutes of riding, we arrived at a place from which we could observe the large bridge. Mitri jumped off the bike with the grace of a squirrel, turned around in place. Leaving the indoors for the first time in a while made her as excited as a child. She looked at the scenery and gasped in amazement.
こんな風に見える場所がありましたのね。
君は奥島に来て1年以上になると聞いたが、知らなかったのかね。
残念ですけれど、あなたのような不良学生と違って、スクールの学生が学園外に出る機会はめったにないですもの。
The academy was a boarding school that strictly forbid unnecessary outings. Every student there was an HMI. If they weren't careful enough while outside, they could cause serious problems there. Dazzling small paradise was both a greenhouse to save them from the cold society as well as a bomb storage facility.
あの橋、以前にも見たことはありますが、こうして落ち着いて眺める余裕も時間もありませんでした。それよりも、外に出てもよかったのですか？スクールの追っ手が私たちを探しているはず。見つかれば人騒動では済みませんわよ。
その時はなんとかするとも。
She made a surprised face, as though tricked by a fox, as the Japanese would say.
それは何も考えておられないのではありませんの？
臨機応変と言ってほしいものだね。思い悩むよりも行動こそが世界を変えるのだよ。
Mitri spreads her arms out as though dancing. Felt like I was looking at a girl who saw the sea for the first time. She reminded me of what I thought back at the ball. Her steps weren't light but refined. She adopted a manner of walking that was silent and graceful.
大胆なのか慎重なのか、成田さん以外の方がおっしゃったら正気を疑うところですわ。
私ならば良いということは信頼してくれているということだね。嬉しい限りだ。
彼の態度に笑ってしまいそう。普通に考えれば今はとても笑えない状況なのに。
Mitri spun around in place. Going outside after being locked up indoors for several days had made her body move on its own.
我ながら子供のよう、お祭りみたいに浮かれている。でもこれは一時の夢だ。
Knight silently watched over, his worry of all directions even as he was escorting her. He was relaxed and didn't use any unnecessary energy by default, but he was ready to act at any moment. That made Mitri liken him to a loaded bullet. Mitri could have stand it all very well. Non-standard perspective was the very proof of an HMI. In most cases, HMIs had one or more of their 5 senses linked to their halos. For example, Sodoko Katsuragi's halo was linked to her vision, letting her see other people's wounds. Vision, smell, touch, varied case by case, but the very world HMI saw was different than the one seen by normal people. And after seeing the world differently, it also changed your very nature. That was why ascended type HMIs had to reconcile their past perception with the current one, learn how to control it from step 1. If you weren't able to filter out the conflicts between the past you and the world augmented by your halo, the result would be tragic. It was called the Slider Syndrome. Mitri had her power for as long as she knew. She was a born HMI. She'd been connected to her halo since the start, and it never seemed unnatural to her. She's often been called a sniper, but the radius of her influence was actually no more than 5 meters. Mitri Kaputuyama was the queen of this harmonized world. Physical area type halos controlled a certain area with rules that differed from reality. She was able to read all the gestures of those who entered, even the neural signs flowing through them that through them didn't escape her.
以前も思った。彼は姿勢がいい。背筋がすらりと伸びていて、見とれてしまう。たくましくて、落ち着いていて、それがとても自然で、まるで大きくてまっすぐ伸びる木のよう。音無さんが時の先生から受け取ったプロフィールだと、彼はごく普通の中流家庭に生まれたというけれど、そしてたくさんの傷、古いもの、新しいもの、数えることもできるけれど、きっと数えきれない。時々彼自身も気づいていないくらい、かすかに左側へ重心が移るのはそちらの肩に深い。多分刃物の傷があるから。
Mitori's perspective allowed her to examine his body as if it was his own. Her own. She could easily tell that he was behaving differently than usual. She couldn't read his mind, but the state of his body allowed her to guess his mental state to an extent.
わざわざ連れ出したのはどうして？
She looked at him with a knowing expression, playfully bending her waist and looking up at him. It made Narita make a somewhat weak expression. It was quite a rare sight. Narita controlled himself surprisingly well, even by Mitori's standards, but tonight he seemed really weak.
ふむ。これも君のハローだとすると、随分といろいろな使い道があるものだね。
女の秘密はそうやすやすとは手に入らないものですわ。
Narita caressed her cheek with interest. Mitori avoided the question, but she was slightly astonished by the fact he noticed.
それで私に言いたいことが終わりなのでは？
持って回った言い方は好まないので、単刀直入に行こう。君の血液を調べさせた。
いつの間にそんなことは。
襲われた夜、君が意識を失っている間に採取しておいたものだ。遅まきながら無礼を浴びよう。
She was almost shocked by how thorough he was. Even during the chaos after the attack, he was already prepared for the future. To compare, Mitori had been so overwhelmed by the situation that she could barely even think.
それはつまり、あの時の変異がどういったものか、影響がないかどうかを調べましたのね。
君は聡明だ。
結果は恐る恐る尋ねる。知るのが恐ろしい。でも聞かないわけにはいかない。
要約するなら、
多分私は笑っていた。言われたことがよく理解できなくて、彼は淡々と答えてくれた。この上なく残酷で救いのない内容を。兜山みとりがとっくにまともな人間ではないのだと。何かの聞き間違いだろうか。もう一度尋ねてみた方がいいかもしれない。そう思ったら。めまいを起こしかけた。ふわりと足元の感覚が消えて、自分が制御をしくじったのだと。
しっかりしたまえ。君はそれほど弱い心の持ち主か。
倒れかけた背中を彼が抱き留めてくれていた。はあ、まったく。今さっき、お前は化け物だ、と、あなたから無情にも宣告されたばかりだというのに。でも、今優しくされたら、きっとすがってしまう。吐き気がする。体の中がひっくり返ってしまったよ。立っていられない。へたり込んでしまいたい。弱音を吐き出すのは負けてしまったようで。そんな無様な自分を我慢できない。だから、獅子をもう一度制御する。動揺する心を立て直す。自分を、
踏みとどまるのか。君は実に麗しい乙女だな。
Mitori heard the praise, formed a smile, and stood tall once more, distancing herself from him and refusing the hand he offered.
弱っている女に優しい言葉をかける男なんて、ろくでなしに決まっていますわ。
名高い兜山家の令嬢にしてはすれた言葉を使うのだね。
今のお話本当なのですね。
美しい心根の乙女を欺く言葉を私は持たないよ。
Mitri embraced herself tight as though to pay her freezing cold. She was not human. What she thought was certain instantly crumbled. Reminded her of the day her homeland was hurt. The malice of the world came in without a warning.
成田さん、私どうなってしまうのでしょうか。
正直言ってわからない。専門家なら手がかりくらいは持っているだろう。
It was clear who he meant by that. After a profound pause, Mitri began opening up with that clear voice of hers.
私はスクールを愛しているのです。
君を処理しようとしたとしても。
それでもあの場所は私に多くのものを教えてくれました。友というものの尊さも、自分が何者であるのかも、おとなしさんとも出会いました。私にとってそれは一生分の価値のある出会いだった。
誇れる出会いを得たのだね。それは黄金にも勝る価値がある。胸を張りたまえ。
Mitri fell silent for a moment and pondered. Clenching her teeth, she fought off the crushing primal fear of gradually losing her humanity. She came across a certain idea.
成田さん、私の変質はハローが原因だと思われますか？
可能性は高いだろう。現状他に思い当たる節がない。それが君個人の問題かそうでないかは別として。
でしたらこれから先のお話ですが、おとなしさんと連絡を取って力を借りるのはどうでしょう。
策にか。彼女は神々しい豊満の神秘だが、この状況を打開できるのかね。
おとなしさんは確かにクラウンでも一番大きいですがそこは今問題ではありません。これがハローが原因だというのでしたら、おとなしさんならなんとかできるかもしれませんわ。
できるかもというのは、それがおとなし策のハローということかね。
詳しい説明は省きますが、おとなしさんは HMI とハローを切り離せます。だから原因がハローなら。
それが本当なら確かに可能性はあるか。
Narita was quite uncertain about it, but Mitri understood why. Takotonashi's kingly Arthurian was above the very concept of halos. It was hard to believe that it could do what it could do until he saw it himself.
しかし策はクラウンの筆頭だ。彼女の人となりからして陰謀に加担しているとは思わないが、黒船や時の女子の意向に逆らえるだろうか。
あの人はどれだけ迷っても最後には必ず選ぶべき道を見出す人です。もしその上で彼女が私の死を望むというのなら。
Mitri hung her head. That was all she could do. She couldn't honestly say that Sako wouldn't wish for her death. For all she knew, Tokino might have had a valid reason for trying to dispose of her so vehemently. If there was something like that.
それはきっと仕方のないことなのでしょう。
Mitri Kaputiyama bit her lip as she claimed that she would have no choice but to face her death if Sako Otonashi willed it.
仕方のないことなどこの世界にはありはしない。
でも
Naitara rejected the notion, but Mitri found it hard to accept it. After all, there were many situations in this world in which people would have no choice but to accept it.
諦めて投げ出すのなら他人の言葉ではなく君自身の意志でそう決めたまえ。世界が敵に回るとしても戦っていいのだよ。誰が貶めようと間違っていると言うとしても君は君の正しさを貫いて構わないのだ。その結果勝つか負けるか、思いを果たせるか、道半ばで倒れるかはまた別の話だ。戦わなければ負けることもないが悔いが残る。同じ敗北をするのなら 全力を尽くして納得のできる敗北を手にする方がいい。それに世界の全てが否と答えても、私は最後まで君の勝利を信じて疑わないよ。
まったく、あなたという人は本当に口のうまい、いつも身勝手なくせに。こういう時の成田さんは子供みたいな顔でまっすぐ笑う。ずるいずるいずるい、すごくずるい、とてもずるい。なんだかわからないけど、この人はとってもずるい。
さて、君の提案はもっともだ。加えて言えば、筆頭の策なら我々の知らない学園内の機密にも手が届くかもしれない。我々の傷もそこそこには癒えた。こうして身を隠しても拉致は開かない。それにただ待つのも性に合わない。あと、そうなると問題は策がスクールの中にいることだな。外部から連絡するのは不可能。接触するには直接出向くしかない。
難しいでしょうか。
こっそり近づいてノックしてから部屋に入る。簡単なことだよ。
I'm immediately worried about the difficult journey ahead. Nadia put on the usual impudent smile of his. Again, the fucking new scene is just off to fucking space again. I'm gonna be right back. Hey ho. Probably won't keep going for much longer. I would infiltrate, because my chest hurts. I would infiltrate the academy and establish contact with Sako Tanashi. It'd be a difficult job, waiting for the owner of the divine beasts to, of the divine breasts to leave the academy wasn't an option. But there was no guarantee that the bomb within Mitri wouldn't go off soon. This would be far more difficult than sneaking past the surveillance layer as a mere student. I was now a pursued man who infiltrated the enemy base. The academy would surely be more alert now. I'd probably need the same amount of preparation and luck as someone breaking into Alcatraz. The moon was going down. It was past 1 in the night. The time had come to end this late adventure.
明日からも忙しい。そろそろ戻るとしよ
う。成田さん、さっきの話をするためにわざわざここまで。
いけないかね。大切な話にはふさわしい時と場所があるものだろう。
Mitri made a dumbfounded face before she hopped on the bike behind me, and we went on our way back. Instead of going back straight to the church, I took a long detour. And just as I expected, a car had appeared behind us. Seemed like I'd done well by going outside late at night. On the way, the car was switched out with another. The first one took a right and vanished. The other one began following us with a position diagonal behind us. True pros didn't trail a target all alone. Doing so would allow even an amateur to notice and increase the chance of losing them. Experts would follow in groups, switching places every now and then.
少し寄り道をする。ちゃんと捕まっていたまえ。
Pushed the gas pedal, forcing the speed meter to the right. The maiden's dainty yelp at the night scenery melted behind me.
バイクは路地の入り口で発見しました。まだ近くにいる。探せ。
That's right.
Along with my response, I ambushed them. The men hadn't noticed me hiding above them. I'd been holding on to the pipes on the walls of the alley. Landed between them and touched them both with a hand each before they could take out their guns. Looked like I was merely touching them, but it was a technique from the northern style of Kalari, the ancient Indian martial arts, caused pain to run through their body and immobilized them completely. As they became paralyzed, I lightly poked the area between the nose and mouth, the infiltration, as it was called. Both of them fainted at the same time and collapsed as though nothing was supporting them any longer. I'd obviously left the bike in a visible place and hidden among them, along with Mitri to draw them in.
まずは2人。
There was a domestic car parked right in front of the alley as if it was nothing. I closed in on it and gently knocked on the front window.
早いな。見つかったのか。
残念ながら見つけたのは私の方だ。
Put a Glock 17 against the side glass. The knock told me that it wasn't bulletproof. If it was a standard handgun, with a standard handgun, I would be raising the hammer now. But because of the Glock's unique polymer frame construction, it had neither a hammer nor manual safety. The high use of plastic made it look like a toy, but the fact that the trigger was all you needed was to use made it very simple and practical. Truly Australian treasure.
両手を頭の後ろに組んで、おとなしく出てきてくれると助かる。
The Muslim before him made it impossible for him to refuse, and he just did as told. Took him to the alley, and when he saw the two fainted men, the sight made him grimace.
安心したまえ。命までは奪っていない。私はこれでも平和主義者だ。不要な暴力は好まない。
That also meant that I wouldn't hesitate if it wasn't necessary. This could become ugly, so I had Mitri not get involved in this.
質問に答えろ。
答えれば、答えるとき、答えろ。ああ、わかった。
As I gave him the order, I checked his body and took out his ID and gun. He had an SP-2000, a gun too high quality to be used by Mafia or other gangs. There was some fake IDs, but the real one was...
Sairo?
The Cabinet Information Research Office. Though small, it was the country's only intelligence agency. It was affiliated with the Cabinet. So they had been the ones walking around these past few days.
我々を尾行した目的は？
命令。スクール内部で問題。学生が逃走したかも。生存しているのなら追跡。
黒船。スクールの依頼か？
違う。
なんだと？
I didn't expect that. However, with his mind being suppressed by my halo, Hamlet 12, he was definitely speaking the truth. Thinking about the Academy didn't mobilize anyone. If the Academy did mobilize anyone, it's impossible that they would get Syra. They would have used something more fitting, such as Okushima's police. Whoops. Then who was mobilizing them?
どこからの命令だ？お前はどの程度聞かされている？
政府筋からだと、対象は帝黒船の息のかかったスクールに所属。
Apparently they were only given minimal information. Realizing they couldn't learn anything more from him made him faint to the weak spot on the throat. More or less had the script figured out. Kurfuna was backed by a giant community that was hard to pinpoint. It was a sort of source of all his political authority. However, no matter how great it was his backing, the vested interests there didn't find it pleasant that a newbie was able to wield so much power. Politics was a game of musical chairs. If someone was to take a chair, someone else would drop out. It was a law of the universe that any reaction had an equal and opposite reaction. This meant that this country's government had people who found Kurfuna and the group backing him to be objectionable. This incident had someone leaked and was caught in their net. And again, it's possible that the Academy wasn't able to hide the fact that two Etoiles had vanished at the same time. The obsession they displayed while trying to dispose of Mitri made it clear that this matter was of critical importance to the Academy. That meant that failing to dispose of Mitri was an unaccounted for major blunder for Kurfuna. A problem so great that it could perhaps be fatal to him. Some had decided to wield it as a poisoned dagger against him and dispatched Syro to capture us. That seemed like the current script.
敵の敵は味方とも言うが。
But I used them. No means of facing Kurfuna head on. That's why they opted for what was basically poison. However, even peerless heroes could be tripped up by the small people in their moments of carelessness. The malice of man was without limits. Looked at it like that. It would very well become obstacles to Shinrin Narita too.
そんな真似が許されようか。この怒りを、この復讐を、余人が阻むなど。
Pushed unconscious men deep into the dark alley. They would wake up in a few hours. Strange happenings stood out, especially well near the silent rural towns. Once whoever was behind them knew that they were alive, it would be easier to read their approach. If it would seem like I could use them, I would. If they would be in my way.
そろそろ黒船もこちらの生存に感づいている頃だろう。
The situation was about to shift. The modern halfway of the academy, pure of its sterility, was strangely noisy today.
兜山みとりと成田真理の対抗理由については先日伝えた通りです。
納得がいかないと言っているんです。成田ならともかくみとりもいなくなるのはどう考えても変です。
The head lecturer Tokino Yomisa walked ahead in an orderly manner, and a rejecting aura, while Sakura Tanashi followed after with thunderous steps. Tokino was tall and her steps were wide, so Sakura had to put in the effort to not be left behind. Tamo Akihito was right behind them, watching their exchange with ice-cold eyes, like it was a vapid play. Sakura had been confronting Tokino ever since 281's disappeared a few days ago. Tamo knew that it was pointless. She could tell that the Siren Lady wasn't the type to talk just because a student didn't back down.
個人的な干渉で事実を否定するのですか？兜山さんは実家の問題でやむなくここを去りました。
でも
そこまで言うのなら真実を話しましょう。音無さん、正直あなたには知らせたくなかったのですが、
Tokino stopped to turn to her as though she had enough.
兜山みとりについては残念ながら私も一身上の理由としか知らされていないのです。そして成田真理は逃亡しました。
逃亡？それは一体。
彼は無許可でスクールを抜け出し、市内で見かけたとある女性にいかがわしい行為を行い警察に追われ逃亡したのです。
は？時野先生今なんて。
Listen, you shouldn't be too surprised that he's on the sex offender registry, even if it's just fondling.
ですから通りすがりの金髪で巨乳で妙齢の女性に極めてハレンチな行為をし、警察に現行犯で逮捕されるところを逃亡。現在も消息は不明のままです。具体的にどんなハレンチ行為を働いたのかまでは言えませんが、
どんな行為かなんて聞くまでもなく決まってます。
このような不名誉かつ残念な不祥事はスクール始まって以来です。できれば明かしたくありませんでした。我々はこんな過ちが二度と起こらないよう十分な注意を払わなければなりません。では音無さん、私は次の講義がありますので失礼します。
時野先生待って、まだ話は途中。先生。
Tokino hastily walked away, leaving Sakura with an overwhelmed face. Tomo approached a friend and talked with a voice full of consideration.
みとりはさ、よっぽど急な事情だったんじゃないか。みとりのことはよくわかってる。ずっと一緒にやってきたんだから。私よりもしっかりしてる。どうしてもままならない理由があったとしても、絶対に一言ぐらい残していく。えらく信じたもんだな。
Tokino had obviously danced around the question again, but Sakura continued to trust her so much that Tomo found it strange.
私、なんとかみとりと連絡を取ってみるわ。できれば成田にも。もしも今何か困っているなら、どんなことがあっても助ける。
Tomo thought that Sakura herself didn't actually believe that she could do what she said. She then went on to glare at the end of the hallway Tokino disappeared to. Last night, after meeting up with Mitri again, I returned to the church where we began frantically constructing a plan. The preparations were complete the very next day, as in this very afternoon.
君の体調は良いようだね。
あれだけ休暇を過ごせば元気にもなりますわ。
Her smile was as faint as moonlight and as charming as a flower, giving it the power to attract anyone's eye. In terms of appearance and brilliance of mannerism, she was above even Sokka. It was the kind of refinement you could only expect from esteemed families with a long history.
これからスクールへ向けて出発するが、ここに忘れ物はないかね。
私が持っていたものといえば制服ぐらいです。忘れるほどのものもありませんわよ。
ここにはおそらく戻れない。
どういう意味ですの？
今朝教会の周りに犬がうろちょろしていた。軍人の類ではない。私服だったがポリスだな。スクールが県警に掛け合って動員したのだろう。
It was now clear Kurofune was certain that we survived. There were no bodies where they lost us. So it was reasonable to believe that we made it. No matter how unlikely that seemed. We could only hide here for a few more days. That was fine by me. It wasn't my nature to hide like a rat. I would rather face the man head on and destroy whatever he was planning.
あちらも本気ということですのね。
She gently moved her fan and made an indomitable smile. It wasn't the kind of face you would expect from someone who'd learned the terrible truth of the day before.
どうやら君という乙女を見誤っていたらしい。
真実を聞かされたから立ちすくむとでも？
己の見る目のなさを謝罪しよ
う。Masterfully concealing what was within, she stood as straight as she could. Mitiri was a proud soul that no wind could break. That made me want to protect her.
ところで、その軍人だとか警察ですとか、見ただけでわかるものですの？
ふむ、歩き方が公務員臭かったのでね。
Organizations always optimize their human resources to make them most suitable for their goals. You could see it even in the way they walked, and if you had an eye for it, it was way too obvious.
成田さん、今までどういう生き方をしてこられましたの？
私は私のあるがままを生きてきた。ただ一つ思い定めた、なすべきことをなすために。
Mituri and I left the hideout. Hisha would clean up the place and go on to operate elsewhere. I considered infiltrating the academy alone and taking Saku out, but Mituri was like a bomb. There was no telling when she would explode. So far, only I could hold that back. With that in mind, it would be easier to convince Saku if I had Mituri herself with me. For now, we went to the direction opposite of the academy, downtown Okushima. We stopped in the middle of the bridge over the Furumachi River, flowing close to the station.
どうかされましたか？
Oh, cute outfit. Wise as she was, Mituri didn't miss my slight reaction.
君はよく気のつく乙女なのだね。
お世辞でごまかされるほど安い女ではありませんわよ。
そんなつもりはないとも。少し考え事をしていた。スクールも我々の生存を確信している。となると、どういった手で攻めるべきか。いくつかプランはあるが、やはりここは派手に行こう。緑、脱ぎたまえ。
は？
聞こえなかったのかね。服を脱ぎたまえ。
いえ、それはさすがに。だいたい殿方の前で服を。
いいからおとなしく。
やめて！近寄らないで、この鬼畜！今日という今日はあなたのハレンチを黙って見過ごしはしませんわよ。
落ち着きたまえ。できないと言うなら私が手を貸してあげよう。
ダメです！いけません！顔がやらしい！そんなところに触れてはやめて！ハレンチ感！好き者！いや近寄らないで、このけだもの！
I resent such accusations. Charming sight of a young pair messing about made the passer-by throw a glance and look away as if they didn't see anything. Mitiri resisted, but I quickly seized her and took off the summer coat I'd given her for disguise purposes.
当然人目につくまでもないな。交差点のところにも2人いる。私服だがポリスだ。
Whispered that into Mitori's ear, making her open her eyes
そ
wide.
うなのですか？
慌てて周りを見るような真似は厳禁だよ。相手はプロだ。ふむ、ミトリ。君の力で見分けはつかないのだね。
どの程度鍛えられた相手かくらいならわかりますが、そこまで見分けるとなると、どうされるつもりですの？相手を教えていただけるのなら、私が何とかしてご覧に入れますわよ。
派手に行くと言わなかったかね。
Embraced her like a flower thief taking his lover out through a window and ran up the bridge's railing. The unexpected action made Mitori gasp. On the edge of my vision, I saw the observers rush towards us. But then I kicked off the railing. My destination was the river. World record for a running long jump was 8 meters 95 centimeters. The best I could do with next to no acceleration. To meet through my hand was only half of that. Couldn't reach the other shore, but before we fell in the water, a sightseeing boat appeared right on time. The small ferries were going back and forth the river because of the tourists that would visit the place during the season. The boat was faster than I expected, so I almost fell off, but I was able to land on its back end. The boat only had seats for 12 people. Not even half of them were filled, but everyone who was here voiced their surprise. The observers who'd lost us were shouting something from the bridge, so I waved them goodbye with one hand.
では諸君、またの再会を楽しみに。
成田さん、あなたいきなりなんてことを。いい加減慣れたつもりでしたけれど、本当に驚かされてばかり。
驚きこそが人生の素晴らしき友だよ。退屈なだけの日々を過ごすほどの苦痛はない。
そろそろ下ろしてくださいませんこと？いつまでも人前でこんな格好は。
Her squirms were less because of embarrassment and more because of perplexion. She was now looking at the world from a height she didn't know, like a princess carried by a bad man and seeing the outside world for the first time. She also held it like this while running from the gunship, but back then she was in no state to mind the surroundings.
もうしばらくしがみついていた方がいいだろう。かなり揺れるのでね。
The passengers were so surprised that they weren't making a single sound. With Mitri still in my hands, I gave them an honest bow as an apology for the rudeness.
それでは良い旅の続きを。
After waiting for the boat to pass under a few more bridges, I ran through a narrow space between the row seats to the front. At enough speed, I jumped and stayed in the air so long that it seemed like I was walking on air. This one didn't break the world record either, but a leap of nearly 8 meters was still a match to the legendary acts of ancient Japanese generals, and it easily took me to the park on the southern shore.
ポリスが追いついてくる頃には我々は入り組んだ古い街並みに混じっており、行方は分からなくなっているという寸法だ。
While we did this, Hisha would contact the mediator from before and have him create a large number of our dummies to distract them. It could not work if Kurofune was leading them directly, but if he wasn't, dummies would be kept occupied for a good while. The lack of accessible forces was Kurofune's weakness. During this time, we would infiltrate the academy. It would be hard to imagine that we, disposed prey on the run from powerful organizations, would enter the highly fortified base of the hunters.
でもこんな目立つやり方をしなくても。
私は生来派手好きなのでね。
We escaped the eyes following us, and we still had to find a reliable way to approach the academy. Like, you really just gotta love the fucking, like, kind of grandiose bastard that he is. That was a difficult task. The academy was on a hill area linked to the Oitashi Mountains south of Miyamamaya. It was approximately 10 kilometers away from Okushima, and you had to switch from the southbound Onuki-Route to Road 136. The path was almost completely straight. That much was simple, but they also made it easy to create a defensive web. The Academy wanted to dispose of us, specifically Mitori, at any cost. They couldn't attack us in urban areas, but that was no reason to let our guard down. Japan's roads were also full of speed cameras and ANPR devices. The combination of those things allowed for the creation of an extremely effective observation network. Not even I was brazen enough to believe I could crush such defenses by fighting it head-on. That was why we chose a route that didn't use the main road. We went through Miyama, then took a roundabout western route towards Oitashi, which made this an actual mountain hike. Mitori probably had no proper mountain climbing experience, so it had to be difficult for her. But even with that considered, this was the optimal route. That thought of mine was quickly dispersed. In all honesty, I was surprised.
足元に気をつけたまえ。
A place where it was hard to find good footing, I gave her my hand. Mitori didn't object and took it in a manner so refined you would think I was inviting her to dance. She didn't have any equipment, but her steps were clean and
登
elegant.
山経験が豊富なのかね。
We obviously didn't take some established hiking path. Miyama and Oitashi were higher than 300 meters, but we were basically insisting on climbing them in the worst possible way. Slowed down here and there out of consideration for Mitori, but although this path could make a grown man whimper, she was keeping up with me without so much as a groan.
レジャーやバカンスで出かけることはありましたわ。
最近のレジャーは随分過酷らしいな。
Though Mitori was a crown, she was an amateur who just recovered from an injury. Despite that, she didn't show any signs of fatigue. It didn't look like she was just acting tough either. It seemed to be more than just her physical ability or lack of it. Was this also done by her halo? I'm curious. We took small breaks every few hours. By myself, I could have gone all the way in one go, but I had to be considerate of the maiden with me. There was a difference between not showing fatigue and not being tired. This was just a guess, but Mitori's halo probably helped with the former, so I had to add breaks just to be safe. Okushima had many rivers going through it. Some locals even insisted that it should be called the Town of Water. Its land was complex and created many water sources. There were valleys, dried-up rivers, and it was hilly in general, making it a complex area to traverse. Giving Mitori a hand, I went down a slope. Mountaineer wisdom said that if you were lost in the mountains, it was best to walk through the ridge lines. Therefore, they gave a good view of the surroundings and made it easy to guess where you were. Valleys are the exact opposite. The beach, forest, and in the valleys below were so dense and verdant that you wouldn't believe they were so close to a town. The view between the leaves was akin to that in a deep dark sea. In spite of the proximity to the world of man, the forest was no place for humans. Though we had become the prime of the earth and had an immense amount of control over the planet, we were still outsiders in many parts of it. Unless beings who feared the unknown used their wisdom and tools to overwhelm such alien places and establish their own rules in them.
あとどれくらいでしょうか。
Tough as she was, even Mitori was showing signs of fatigue. Could have also had something to do with the fact that we had entered the valley and the lack of vision made her anxious.
さっき川を越えたから、すでに生い立山に入っている。行程も半分は来た。もっとも、我々がいるのは北側の斜面。スクールは南側。
The fact that she would still have to scale a whole mountain made Mitori sigh. It was impressive that she wasn't actually complaining.
地図もご覧にならないのに、まるで住み慣れた土地のようにおっしゃいますのね。
地図なら出がけに見たとも。あとは記憶をたどれば済む。安心したまえ。私の方向感覚は渡り鳥といい勝負だ。迷う心配はないよ。
I'd once been attacked by guards in the middle of the South American jungle, separating me from my comrades and equipment, forcing me to arrive at the rendezvous point 50 kilometers away while avoiding pursuers.
本当にこれまでどんな生き方を。
静かに。
Singer for her to be silent and lowered my body and hid my presence by going behind the trees. Light was raining down on the leaf mold below, making the trees look like the deep sea. Something that didn't belong mixed with the air. In the silence, I picked up a sound that didn't belong at all.
読まれたか。
At the bottom of the slope we slipped down, there were familiar silhouettes that looked like the sole drop of culture within this
お
forest.
前か。帝大義。
Saw Taggy and the maid that looked like just like the one I'd executed a few days ago. Looked like they had on the day. They looked just like they had on the day I first saw them in the garden.
やあ、二人とも久しぶり。というほどのことはないか。まあ、死んだはずの学友に再会できるのは感動的だよ。そちらが見つけてくれてよかった。僕から探すのは。
It was as casual as he had always been back at the academy, but the FAMAS in the maid's hands made it clear that he wasn't here on friendly terms.
大義さん、あなたが私を待っていたのですか。まさか理事長の命を受けて。
If we'd come here to stop us as Kurufuna's son, we would have to fight him, wouldn't we?
よくもこの場所が分かったものだな。
考えてみたのさ。成田ならどうするか。逃げるだけは性に合わないんじゃないか。しかし、打って出るにもまだわからないことが多すぎる。では、どうするか。スクールへ向かうんじゃないかと思った。敵のど真ん中に飛び込むなんてのは、およそ正気の沙汰じゃないが、君ならありだろ
う。悪くない。
I was honestly surprised that he read me that well. This was quite a dire situation, though. Considering the location, it wouldn't be strange for us to be completely surrounded. No, that didn't seem right. Tried scanning the surroundings for more enemy presences, has found absolutely nothing. Why would he come with just one maid when this place was so good for an ambush?
どういうつもりだ、大義。
He knew what I meant, but didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Mitri with eyes that seemed full of both grief and admiration.
正直、予想外だったよ。成田はともかく。ミトリ、君がまだ以前の状態を保っているのはね。
大義さん、あなた何をご存知ですの？
It was understandable why she would raise her voice. If his words were to be believed, he knew something about Mitri's condition. However he acted like he didn't even hear Mitri's desperate call.
君たちの考えを当ててみせようか。策の力を借りるつもりだろ
う。それはあなたの力、予言ですの。
さあ、どうだろう。ともかく、目の付けどころはいいよ。彼女なら、確かにミトリを救えるかもしれない。
そう思うのでしたら、大義さん、あなたも私たちに力を貸して。
Taigi continued as if rejecting her plea.
だからこそ、最悪だ。君たちの行動は、事態を取り返しがつかなくしてしまう。
何を知っている？
知っていることを教えてください。それができないなら、せめておとなしくそこをどいていただけませんか。
まだ僕を友人と言ってくれるんだね。
私はそのつもりですわ。
For a brief moment, an air akin to the one we had during the peaceful days at the academy formed around us, but the very next moment it became as sharp as a drawn blade.
大義さんは分かっておられるでしょう。あなたのメイドが何者かはよく存じておりますが、この距離なら勝負はついておりますのよ。
With absolute confidence, Mitri faced Taigi and the maid that shared a visage with one that had almost killed her. She said that the fight was already over. The distance between us was about 10 meters. To her gun, that was as close as no distance at all, and if the maid was as skilled as the one I killed, she would never miss. However, Mitri was also a sure kill weapon. It meant the invisible space that never missed. No HMI could win against her when there was enough distance between them. There was a reason why she was considered the crown's sniper. Sounds pierced like a needle. Tangi's eyes had no excitement for battle nor fear for the incoming death. Still looked as withered as an old man. I'd known him well once, but couldn't read him at all now. I didn't even need to ask why. Just changed that drastically.
この世界はなんと悲しいところだろう。人は役者。あまりに虚しい舞台に踊り続ける。
お前は黒船の命令で動いているわけではないのか。一体何のために現れた。
君たちと以前やり合ったガンシップを上空に待機させている。この場所にミサイルを照準して。
Ethan and I gasped and looked up at the covers of leaves and made it hard to see the sky and let out the gunship. We were in a forest where we could see little. They would attack us with an area attack from a range where our halos couldn't reach. And that was enough to make our powers useless. However, it was impossible to hide the use of missiles not far from town in broad daylight. Was he bluffing? No, Tiger was serious. Then why did he go out of his way to show himself before us? The missile blast would reach him too now.
何がお前をそこまでさせる。
黙って兜山みとりを引き渡せ。理事長、父や時の先生は成田も処理しようとするだろうが、それについては僕は関与しない。みとりを引き渡せば君は好きなところへ行けばいい。
まさかそんなザレ言を伝えるためにわざわざ自分から出向いてきたのか。そしてそんなくだらない取引に私が従うとでも思ったのか。罪なき乙女を見捨てろとは私の心情を踏みにじる申し出だ。
どうしてそこまで。大義さん、知っておられるのなら教えてください。一体何がどうなっ。
Dispose of her. Tiger refused to answer, but the sound was proof that he knew the truth.
どうしても教えるつもりがないというのなら私も手段は選ばない。
He could suppress his mind with my hamlet, set 12. Couldn't reach the gunship above, but it reached Tiger.
そうか、成田。ある程度は手がかりを得たんだね。それでミトリに何の予兆もないとは。
Saw a crack in his unbreakable of self-effacement. It made me aware that he actually felt very concerned. Were maybe these circumstances that bad? If they were, then why didn't he explain them? If one wanted cooperation from Shindri Narita, they had to use reason to its fullest, rather than wield vague words. Taigi must have known this well.
話さないではなく。
Was he hushed? No, he couldn't speak despite wanting to. What if it was something to do with that would... What if it was something that would produce a negative result just by being known?
教えてください。私は何も知らないまま撃たれるわけにはいきません。
一つ聞こう。ミトリを引き渡したらスクールは彼女をどうする。
Tiger was avoiding looking into Mitori's eyes as though he was afraid of meeting them. I knew the answer to my question full well, but the awkward sincerity behind his silence almost made me laugh. He had many lives he could have chosen, but the man didn't allow himself that luxury. I touched the lubless lazuli on my chest. I was standing on the verge of death. He had wasted time on his meaningless yet precious action, knowing full well it cost me my life. The ultramarine gem was a remnant of days lost, the origin of Shindri Narita, shining bright but beyond reach, just like the distant rainbow. They were days when Shunsei Miku was still left, holding hands with Jaigi, Soloko and his dear sister. Since then, enough time had passed for the child to become an avenger, and the traitor to become a saint. Taigi still had something inside him that resembled what I had basically sunk to the bottom of the river. Despite all the drastic changes, there were things that remained the same. A discovery warmed and drenched my chest, which had become dry with hatred. I couldn't tell whether the fact that I found something like this after coming back to have my revenge was blissful or sad. Taigi's silence that he didn't understand told me more than any words. It led me to realize Mitori was at a loss for words, likely because she realized the same thing, that her hopes would simply have to end. Taigi's silence said that they had a proper reason, that she would not be free no matter what they have sacrificed to capture her.
これ以上ミトリと関わろうとするな。この件本来成田は部外者だ。
I gave Mitori Kabutayama to the... If I gave Mitori Kabutayama to the academy, they would dispose of her. Knowing that was the only thing I could do. Knowing that, there was only one thing I could do.
私はミトリを守ると約束をした
Didn't hesitate whatsoever. A promise had to be fulfilled no matter what cost.
残念だな。
What the cost.
その願いは叶わない。
Taigi was serious about that. He must have spoken with disinterest and not quite in gear. Words had to be honest for them to reach my heart like this. Chindri Narita's wish would not come true. The promise to protect her, as well as my desperate fight for it, would eventually become worthless. After all, Taigi was always right, even in those days long gone. But what of it? The outcome didn't matter to me. I would see a promise through to the end. That was the one thing that Chindri Narita would never compromise.
彼女を守るために必要な全てをしよう
見捨ててしまえば人間ではなくなってしまうというわけか。君には似合わないセリフだ、成田。こう言うべきだ。生きて願いを果たすのか、死んで費えさせるのか、それが問題だ。
Indeed, that suited Chindri Narita better. Though perhaps that wasn't right. Like the eventual Prince of Denmark, Chindri Narita didn't have any of the torturous hesitation. I knew what I had to do, even if it wasn't human. It was something I'd chosen myself, so I'd see it through to the end. I didn't call it what I had to do lightly.
人はいつか死ぬ
Told him a well-known fact of
死
life.
は最初から我らの友だならばあとは生き方の問題だ
Would I die in the flames of mad revenge? Or would I collapse while trying to fulfill my promise to Mitori? Regardless, I would use my life in a way I wouldn't regret and face death with a smile on my face, as if every moment I lived was a bright
そ
fire.
うか。
There was a resignation in his voice. It was clearly a goodbye. He raised his right hand, ready to give the order for the gunship to fire the missiles. To use my halo to stop him, but whatever was even worth trying. The fact that he showed himself before us meant that he already considered our halos. It meant that the firing controls weren't here. There was an earphone-type comms device in his ear. His conversation was monitored and sent to the gunship. The missiles would fly the moment we acted strange. And it was about to happen regardless. The gunship showed up above the black spot. Showed up above as a black spot. So anti-ground sweeping weaponry was equipped with ordnance that would leave a crater. It was quite a luxurious arsenal for just two people. Taigi showed no intention to back away. The maid next to him was aiming a rifle at us as though this was planned. If they backed away, they would lose sight of us. Did they intend to observe us until they confirmed we were dead?
正気か大義死にたいのか
それも悪くないかもしれない。成田に正気を解かれるというのはおかしな気分だけどね。
Like, you know, nice idea, but still, how fucking dare you?
大義さん、私は
ミトリの前に立った時点で覚悟はしているよ。僕らは好きにしていい。たとえ盾にしても攻撃は止まらない。
So he just grabs him and yeets him, blocking the missile. It was too absurd to be considered a product of a do-or-die spirit. It was a self-abandonment, if not just suicide. Nah, this wasn't the time for such unnecessary thoughts. What I need now is the will to tide over the situation, declare to move my entire body with perfect precision, down to each of my fingers. I took out the Glock from the holster at my side.
まさかそんなものでミサイルを撃ち落とそうとでも。
そこまで狂ってはいない
As it slowly descended, the gunship entered a trajectory from which it could fire at us. I could tell exactly what was happening within the cockpit. It was targeting, locking on the target, finally firing. I could even picture myself as a scattered mess. If the missiles were actually fired anyway.
何
Comment went upward as though ridiculing reason, leaving a trail behind. There was an FIM 92 Stinger AA missile flying straight towards the side of the gunship that had gone low enough to enter its range.
上出来だ
I'd had Ishia do more than just set up a distraction. After she'd done that, she'd followed after us from a distance and acted as a potential trump card in case we were expected.
僕の方も読まれていたか。君とは相性が悪そうだ。
It wasn't just like the last time, when I didn't have any equipment or anything with me. I knew full well that the enemy had a gunship, so this much preparation was only to be expected. With everyone focused on the sky above, I quickly aimed my Glock at the maid. After dealing with that, I would question
爪
Tiger.
が甘かったな
どちらがかな。
What? In a split second, I noticed the Tiger's eyes still had life in them. It only took a moment to understand why. The gunship above made a sharp turn towards the approaching missile. Facing almost straight down, it was dangerously close to diving into the ground. No matter how modified it was, the gunship's base was an UH-1. Meaning that its aerodynamics remained the same. This absurd trick couldn't be pulled off without the gunship starting to fall. However, displayed magic that surprised even Hishiya Supreme's feat of sniping a modern stealth unit with a cheap portable missile. As it fell, it quickly turned its nose while turning to chain gun turrets at the same time. Couldn't believe my eyes. While performing such acrobatics, the gunship fixed its chain guns on the incoming missiles. Then began firing. If there was a pilot aside, the chief forces would have made him faint. This could only be done because it was automated. But the position itself, evolved in defeat itself, was simply inhuman. Next moment, the missile that was shot down right before the gunship exploded in a bloom of fire. Burned by the heat, the gunship restored its speed and flew upwards with the smoke like a serpent.
化け物じみた真似を
そうとも。あれを動かしているのはコーディリア。人間以上の超 AI だ。
そんなものまで実用化しているだと
Military technology was known to be above civil tech, but that was because the military didn't care about expenses. In most cases, the standard for tech hardly deviated. However, the academy was clearly a generation ahead. The gunship turned in midair, ready to attack again. Just as expected, it fired the rockets equipped on its sides. However, they all were not aimed at us.
Hishiya!
The rockets went to the point where the AA missile came from, Hishiya's location. Pods equipped with 15 unguided rockets, powered by rocket motors. Like guided missiles, they lacked precision. They made up for it with numbers. There was no need to aim. The destructive power of 30 rockets was far above that of the chain gun we were so unpleasantly familiar with. The explosion made the force shake and created smoke that rose to the air. There was no retaliation from Hishiya. Did that kill her? That couldn't be true. I wanted to check, but now wasn't the time to worry about my loyal servant. With the obstacle out of the way, the gunship turned to us.
耳を押さえて口を開け
Even if she didn't know why, Mitri did as I told. I took her in my hands from behind and ran behind the trees. Mitri yelped, but I ignored it. We had to go where we could survive. We only had a few seconds to do that. Trees were no obstacles to the rockets. I had to find higher or lower ground I could use to hide from the explosions and shrapnel. I jumped into a basin that looked like the remains of a dead river. The rocket spray coming from behind chased after us like the hooves of the Reaper's horse. As for Tagi, I spent a moment considering whether my old acquaintance made it, but I had no means of confirming it. As I covered Mitri to protect her from the blasts, we were surrounded by a forced shaking chain of explosions, as well as fires that drowned my vision in white.
Mitori!
After waiting for the shockwaves to abate, I pushed away the dirt and tree remains covering us and stood up, but Mitri was immobile. She was bleeding from her side. A failure on my part, I let a stray fragment hit her. Explosions created fragments that could fly at supersonic speeds, making them as dangerous as bullets. We weren't able to dodge them all. She would have to be treated. We would have to take her to safety. But would I be able to take her to safety when she was so injured? The gunship above didn't stop either. It attacked us with both its chain guns and the anti-ground missiles. The moment I realized that I had no choice but the forceful route, something changed. The barrels of the chain guns were split in 3 and fell. The cross sections of the torso-sized metal pieces were beautiful, as if cut by a sword of legend.
しくじった。最悪だ。
Taigi had survived thanks to the maid carrying him through the barrage. His voice, as I heard it through the dust, was full of distress I never heard from him before. What did that mean? It could only be one thing. Fuck! It rose like a lively song. Shinbi Naita understood just how potent it really was. Well, this is just the perfect place to end the part. I hope you guys enjoyed this one and see you next time. Bye-bye. I'm an asshole. I'm sorry. It's just, it is actually getting late and my chest is really annoying me. Bye.